All members are present. We'll begin with transmitting of Treasury warrants 48, 48A, 48B, 49, and 49A. Do we have a motion?
So move.
Second.
Made and seconded. All in favor? It's unanimous. There are no minutes to approve this evening, so we'll immediately move to our 7 o'clock appointment with Rich Walakewicz, Operations Manager for Napa, and it's regarding a public hearing relative to the request to amend flammable license for property located at 840 Woburn Street. If you'd like to have a seat at the table with the microphone. Excuse me.
Yes, my name is Rich Walakewicz. I'm the Operations Manager at the Napa Distribution Center located at 840 Woburn Street. Looking to amend our license as stated. I have got, what I'm asked to bring here, I've got some attachments here for the, excuse me, losing my train of thought here, to the abutters, the letter to the abutters. I have all the information here as requested. I'll be able to hand that out to you. Looking to increase our flammable license from what it was that dated back to 1991. We want to bring it up to current levels as it is today. We recently have upgraded our fire protection system. I've dealt in the past with retired Deputy Chief Cochran. I've dealt currently with Deputy Brown and also with Chief Bradbury as well. I have a letter here from Deputy Brown and also a letter from a fire protection engineer stating that we are in compliance with the NFPA codes current to Massachusetts at this time.
Thank you. And we also are in receipt of an interdepartmental memorandum from Deputy Brown, and Chief Bradbury is here this evening also to answer any questions if we have them. Questions or comments from the board? If you could review the recommendations that we have.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, the Inspector of Buildings has indicated that he reviewed the application. There are no outstanding zoning or building code issues. The town clerk has worked with the applicant and indicated that they've met all of the necessary criteria. And we do have the aforementioned letter from the fire department indicating that the request for the storage of flammable and combustible liquids to amend the volume of the flammables to be stored at 840 Woburn Street has been reviewed. The fire department finds the documentation to be in order and has no regulatory issues at this time and recommends approval. And as you mentioned, the fire chief is here in the event that there are questions or he needs to add anything to the record.
Okay. Any questions or comments from the audience?
Briefly, Mike, I have no problem with this. I'm actually impressed. As I read through the comments from various boards, including the chief, I'm impressed that it looks like you've been very cooperative in working with all the town administration, so thank you for that. The nature of these chemicals,
Yep.
they're correct me if I'm wrong, but are they all for resale? So these are items that you're increasing the inventory of in order to be able to resell out of the store?
That is correct. We're a distribution center. We currently service 92 stores in our region. We actually have a company-owned store in Wilmington, Mass, located on Middlesex Ave. Over time, as vehicles have evolved, so has the lubricants, if you will, and the biggest thing on our application is our 3B liquids that we're applying to raise. That's the biggest jump and increase. And 3B liquids are your oils and your antifreeze, those are lubricants. And as times evolved, the engines have evolved, and years ago, you really only had a few weights of oil, if you will, 5W30, 10W30, 10W40. Years ago, it used to be the more popular. Nowadays, you have 5W20, OW20, OW30, and you have high mileage, you have synthetic. And of course, being a distribution center, we do stock all brands. We have our own Napa oil brand, but you have Valvoline, you have Mobil, you have Shell, Quaker oil. You have all different brands and a lot of different flavors, if you will. And therefore, that is the result of this increase, the request for the increase in the license.
Again, I have no concerns really whatsoever, but does that, by virtue of what you just described, does that mean that you're moving product more frequently, and is there any inherent, I don't know, concern or Is there potential for more hazard by virtue of the fact you're moving the stuff around more frequently and more often?
It's not potential for more hazard. It is all packaged. We don't package ourselves at the facility. It comes in from the vendors already packaged in a, as you would see, a quart of oil. It comes in a package of 12, and it comes in by pallets to us. So it's shrunk wrap and handled that way. And we will pick orders to ship out to the servicing stores, cases at a time. Some stores do buy pallets, and we do ship via pallets. Whether it's antifreeze as well, same idea, but it's all packaged. It's not that we're handling more to be repackaged, if you will, and have that concern for a spill or anything like that. We've raised our levels because there's more vast coverage now that is required. And from our vendors, some of our vendors, we are required to buy trailer loads at a time. I can't just buy a pallet here or there. I have to buy 20 pallets at a whack to get some of that product in there. So that's, again, that's the result of the request.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Again, thanks for working with the town.
I'll be quite frank, the town has been great to work with, with all the folks at the fire department and Sharon George, our, town clerks have been great to work with. Appreciate everyone's efforts.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Hearing none, do we have a motion?
I make a motion, we authorize a request to amend flammable license for property located at 840 Woburn Street as presented.
Made and seconded. Anything further? All in favor? It's unanimous. And if we could grab those green cards, please.
There is one exception to the rule on the green cards here. I've got a letter back from the post office saying they've tried to deliver it and they can't. But everything's been requested. I have here.
Fair enough.
Okay. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Our 7:10 appointment is with David A. Zinsner, Vice President and Chief Financial Officer, and Ira Moskowitz, Vice President and General Manager, U.S. Operations, Analog Devices, and Peter Milano, Senior Regional Director, Mass Office of Business Development. It's regarding Analog Expansion Plan 804 Woburn Street and discussion relative to Economic Development Incentive Program. Good evening, gentlemen.
And thank you for this opportunity to come and talk to you about some of our future expansion at Analog Devices is planning. Let me just first introduce the others that are here from Analog Devices. On the left, there's Dave Zinsner, who is Vice President of Finance and Chief Financial Officer of the corporation. Marnie Seid, who's in the chair back there, is Vice President, General Counsel, and Secretary of the corporation. And Craig Bergeron, who I think some of you know, is our Director of Facilities for the Wilmington operation. And again, I'm Ira Moskowitz, the General Manager of the Wilmington operation. I just want to start, if I may, just a very brief history of Analog Devices. For those of you that don't know it in detail, we were founded in 1965 by two MIT graduates, and they started up a small analog module company in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And in 1971, about 41 years ago, we were here in Wilmington starting up. We purchased a small company called Nova Devices that had, at that time, a building down in Woburn Street and 70 employees. And over the years, I think we've had an extremely strong relationship with the town, and with your support, we've grown that into one of the largest employers in town. We very well may be the largest. I don't know who is the largest, but it very well could be Analog. At this point, about 20% of our 9,000 worldwide employees do work here in Wilmington. And that one building has expanded now to 4 very large buildings on Woburn Street, plus a world-class manufacturing factory. Today, the Wilmington site helps us maintain our leadership in the manufacturing, design, and marketing of the world's highest performing analog and mixed signal integrated circuits. These kind of products are what enable every imaginable type of electronic device that you could possibly see or hold in your hand or touch. Just about everything that has electricity in it is either enabled or could contain one of our parts. That's from tablet PCs to cell phones, to TVs, to cars, to MRI equipment, to CAT scans, to laptops, to just about everything. We believe that our Wilmington site has been pivotal to this success. We have a lot of our most innovative technologists work in Wilmington and have worked in Wilmington. And right now, Wilmington is the flagship manufacturing site in this country for Analog Devices. And given the broad scope of what the Wilmington campus does, we do support a very wide variety of jobs there. We have some very high-paid engineers and scientists in chemical engineering, electrical engineering, software engineering. We have lots of marketing and finance folks. And we have a large number of hourly jobs that, where we pay very solid wages across a whole variety of shifts that help us run the factory 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Beyond simply employing people here in Wilmington, though, I think, as you're aware, we have remained committed to playing a very active role in the town and the local communities. In addition to the $10 million that Analog has donated to colleges and universities in the state, we have been a very active supporter and participant in the town, member of the Chamber of Commerce, of the Wilmington School Business Partnership, and as a corporate sponsor for a large variety of Wilmington organizations. And that would include the Wilmington High School, the Wilmington High School Athletics Program, the Wilmington Middle School, the Wilmington Middle School Tech Fair, where we have a lot of employees that show up every year volunteering to work with the kids during the science fair, Chamber of Commerce, Wilmington Little League, Wilmington Hockey, Shawshene Valley Technical High School, and a number of other organizations that we annually support. In addition, we sponsor a number of food drives and coat drives and school supply drives that support the local community. And finally, and not the least of it, is that as part of our desire to play a leadership role in being a good corporate citizen, we have a very advanced environmental health and safety program that we're very proud of, and that we have received recognition for by a number of organizations, including the town of Wilmington. Particularly, that program focuses on the reduction of water consumption and the preservation of water in the area. So given our history here, Wilmington is a natural choice as we look to expand our facility footprint as part of our long-term growth strategy as a company. That plan entails investing in the first phase of what looks like a 250,000 square foot facility that would house offices and labs. If we proceed with that initial phase, we believe the investment in that first phase would be approximately $100 million. We anticipate that that development would add a significant number of jobs in Wilmington, would certainly increase tax revenue for Wilmington, and of course have the knock-on effect of continuing and advancing business for the local store owners in the town of Wilmington. As is typical with this process, we have to evaluate a number of our existing sites to determine the best location for this new development. We do have other sites where we are offered attractive incentives to encourage expansion there. However, our bias is to expand here in Wilmington. To move forward, therefore, we do need to seek similar incentives from this area, and therefore we respectfully ask that you accept our request for real estate tax relief under the state's Economic Development Incentive Program, or EDIC program. Therefore, we're asking the town of Wilmington to apply to the state to make this an economic target area, or ETA area, and that affords us the real estate tax relief for the incremental capital spent under a tax increment financing, or TIF, agreement. And I think at this point, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the board. So I work for the Mass Office of Business Development, which is an executive branch agency. And the agency that I work for facilitates the state's Economic Development Incentive Program, which is, in essence, a three-way partnership between expanding businesses, participating communities, and the state, with each part of that partnership agreeing to bring something forward. For the purposes of this discussion, I'll talk about this in very general and quick terms. The way the program works is that if a business agrees to expand, the business would agree to provide net new jobs to the Commonwealth, as well as maintain the baseline number that they currently have. In this case, Analog would agree to provide net new jobs to the Commonwealth, not to the town. The company would also agree to a capital expenditure. Those are the two things. And then lastly, they would agree to provide audit reports at the end of each year. And those come to the state, and we would, at the request of the town, provide you with copies of those audit reports. The town agrees to provide real estate tax relief based on the increased value that their capital expenditure creates. So what that means is, currently, they are being assessed, paying taxes on an assessed value at their property. That number is protected and will remain. There will be no abatements, so that there will be no lost revenue to the town. When the company does spend money, there'll be increased assessed value that the town will see. And in that increased assessed value is where the town can partner with the company and provide real estate tax relief. That real estate tax relief can be between 5 and 100% of the increased value for a term of between 5 and 20 years. And that real estate tax relief has a name. It's called a tax increment financing agreement, commonly referred to by its acronym, or a TIF. And that percentage, or the exemption schedule, is a negotiated value between the town and the company. The town also can negotiate personal property tax exemptions, but for, in this case, as a manufacturer, they would be exempt, as are all manufacturers in Massachusetts. And then rounding out the three-way partnership is the state, and the state can provide investment tax credits of between 0 and 10% on all depreciable assets with a shelf life of 4 years or longer. Combined, that three-way partnership makes up the state's economic development incentive program. The ultimate authority to decide how much investment tax credit will be placed into the deal is decided by a state board known as the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council, and that board will decide once your board, this is a locally driven program, so you folks have the authority to move this forward, and the state will not act until you folks have had the opportunity to act. You don't get to vote on tax credits, you do get to vote on the real estate tax relief, or the tax increment financing agreement. And then ultimately that would be approved by the state board known as the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council, at which time an investment tax credit would be decided upon by the board, the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council, as well as approving any real estate tax relief that you may have awarded. That's a very quick overview of the program. The program has been revamped on January 1st, 2010. It has been very successful. There's been over 90 projects, approximately 90 projects, I should say. It has, with a job creation number of over 5,000 net new jobs to the Commonwealth. The retained number is around 17,000 new jobs retained, with a private investment of somewhere in the neighborhood of $2.7 billion. That's the private investment that has been leveraged through this program. I'm available to answer any questions you may have. I realize that's a lot of information in a very short period of time, but I welcome any questions that the board may have through the chair.
Certainly, if it's okay to jump in now, a couple questions and a comment. First of all, Planning Director Carol Hamilton is in attendance tonight, as is our Principal Assessor Skip Moynihan, so I'm certainly glad to hear from those two folks if they have comments about anything that's been laid out here tonight. First question is a rather simple one. Do you have a publication that the board can review and digest relative to the process that you outlined for the EDIP and the TIF?
We don't have a publication per se. We have a website.
Okay.
I can, if the chair would like a more intense private training with me, I would absolutely make myself available.
Okay, that's helpful. We'll obviously start with questions tonight, but if you continue to be available as a resource, that would be appreciated. In terms of the substance of what you just presented, I want to make sure I have the real basics correct. And the basics of the TIF program or the TIF agreement, as I understood it, was that there is a range of the tax relief that can be given, both in terms of a percentage and years over which that incentive is spread out. And I want to say that you just told us it's 5 to 100% over 5 to 20 years. Did I get that right? Yes. Okay. Am I correct in inferring that that range is determined by agreement of the parties by way of the TIF?
That range is a negotiation between the company and the town. It would be memorialized in a TIF agreement, which is a contract ultimately signed by this board and the company.
Understood. Yep. And then in terms of the executive office, and I can't remember the exact name of the agency you mentioned, but
Massachusetts Office of Business Development.
Business Development, thank you. So the Office of Business Development is the third party to this three-party arrangement that comprises the program. I thought I heard you say that the Office of Business Development approves the TIF. Did I hear you right, or is that inaccurate?
It's slightly inaccurate.
Okay.
There's a board that we have formulated called the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council. There's ex officio members as well as private sector appointees on the board, 14 members. They are geographically appointed, so there's regional appointees from the Northeast, the South, Central, Western part of the state. And that board would be the ultimate approving authority of any projects that would come forward.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Me, as well as you, as well as myself, I'd like to hear from Carol and Skip, but I'd like to reserve a comment later. But if it's okay through you, Mr. Chairman, I would like to ask our Chief Fiscal Officer, the town manager, his thoughts on it, obviously, and I'd like to render, my thoughts in a moment. I think that would be fair if you wouldn't mind, Mike.
Well, the town has been working with Analog over the past several months. You will recall that Analog had written a letter initially to the town to discuss their expansion plans, and then a subsequent letter to clarify that they were interested in this tax increment financing agreement. As the folks from Analog know, and let me just confirm what Ira said, the Analog has been a tremendous partner with the town over the years. They are, in fact, our largest employer and also our largest taxpayer. They've also been very involved in a number of activities in town, so certainly we applaud them for that. The fact is, and we did have this discussion, the town has never done this before. The town has been in a position where we have, on numerous occasions, been requested by various companies, both within the town and outside of the town, to entertain these arrangements. We have taken the position that nothing had impressed us to the extent that would make us want to do something like this. The fact is, the scope of this project has given us pause, and is why we want to bring this forward to the Board of Selectmen. So I think it is a project that's certainly worthy of consideration and worthy of consideration of breaking the mold and establishing the precedent. If we do this, the precedent, we need to be very careful as to how we do it, and we need to make it clear that it is because of the scope of the project, that we have little risk and great reward. That's what we're really looking for here in this particular case. I don't have to tell you about Kurt Schilling's problems and some of the problems that took place up in Devon's and other places where there were similar agreements. The difference here is that this is an established company who's already has a track record here, and the scope of the project of what they're talking about offering is pretty significant. So I think it's, I'm not trying to beg the question, but I think it's clearly worthy of consideration. Carol and Skip and I have had numerous discussions about this. Ultimately, as I understand it, and Peter, you can correct me, although it's the selectmen who make a determination as to whether or not to petition the state to establish it as an economic target area under a particular criteria, it is a town meeting that would ultimately have to approve any arrangement.
That's correct, Mr. Manager. Because there is a financial ramification to the town, this would need to go to a vote of the constituents of the town meeting. And also, when the program was revamped in 2010, there was a couple of safeguards built into the program. First was that any program that would be approved in the program for tax credits would need to export a minimum of 25% of their products outside of Massachusetts. So that would remove any of the urge to incent retailers or companies that are less likely to up and move their companies. That's the first safeguard that was built in. Secondly, there's clawback language that is much more substantial. So if a company does not meet their benchmarks, or if they don't live up to the terms of their TIF agreement, there is language whereby the town and the state can recoup any of the tax incentives, or the dollars actually, that were placed into the deal. So there are safeguards built into the program now.
And can we base a program on milestones?
Well, it is completely built on, you mean jobs?
Well, for example, you know, we're talking about a projection of $100 million in the first phase and an additional $100 million in the second phase. I believe 800 employees in the first phase alone, I think, was the response to a question I had asked earlier. So, you know, how do we manage to ensure that happens once if we were to give a tax break, a property tax break, and of that 100 million and then 200 million, how much of that is real estate and how much of that is personal property? Because as you indicated, we would not have any benefit on the personal property. And that question is to David or to Ira.
Well, first let's talk about the 800 jobs. The program is based on the net new jobs to the Commonwealth, not to the town. So I don't, of those jobs, I think some of them might be net new to the town, not to the Commonwealth. But for the purposes of this discussion, they're all new to the town. So the actual contract or the TIF agreement would be based on what the actual net new jobs to the Commonwealth are. What that number is, I haven't actually delved into the actual number yet. As far as what the actual capital expenditures are, it can be phased in 2 phases, and however, but there will be no personal property tax built into it. It would be an exempt number.
So I guess my question then would be, of the value that you're talking about, Ira, how much of it would be, is that all, is that exclusive of any of the equipment, so that the property would be valued at additional 200 million?
Yeah, right now, my guess is most of that is the construction of the building.
Okay.
Probably a smallest amount would be actual, the factory type equipment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would like to look at it, cautiously as we proceed and look at it. I just want to get the opinion from the town manager, obviously our chief fiscal officer. I do want to hear from a town assessor, because they are the professionals who just gives us advice. And I know my feeling and how I feel about it, but I just want to hear on the town side, and actually, I don't know if there's a dollar amount that we're looking at down the road that it would actually cost the town to pursue it. I know Analog's been a great partner of here in the town of Wilmington, and the company has grown tremendously, producing a semiconductor from its originally where it is today. So I appreciate the manager's input, and thank you, Mr. Chairman. I look forward to hearing from the department heads as well. Thank you.
Just want to say it's an excellent presentation. I appreciate all of you being here, and obviously you have had an extensive partnership with the town. Certainly, Mr. McCoy has said it. Certainly would be interested in hearing more from the planning board as well as from the assessor's office. Certainly, you don't get what you don't ask for, so I certainly applaud your efforts in coming here tonight. I'd like to look at some real tangible empirical data to really frame up the request so that I can make an informed decision. Obviously, I do understand that the manager did state that we have not done something like this before, but quite frankly, you have unique features and benefits that certainly put you as a front leader in the town, and I certainly would commit to you that I will give this my full consideration in reviewing it. And I think that there's a bit more detail and a bit more information that I'd like to review, and reserve the right to review that at this time, but I do appreciate you being here. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said, Judy. You hit a lot of the hot buttons for me. Increased tax revenue, obviously the increase in job opportunities for the local area. The increased number of folks working on campus would therefore create revenue opportunities for the local businesses, the local shops and merchants in the area, so that's good for the local economy. And I'm a big fan of small business and large business collaborating and working together. So this seems like it marries together a lot of really positives for Wilmington and the local community at large. So I'm bullish about it on its face. That the fact that we haven't gone down this road in the past, again, for me, it doesn't feel like that should be or is a controlling or limiting factor. The circumstances around this project are different from what we've faced in the past, as is the economic climate. We all know where we are today. And in as much as I think we are digging ourselves out of the economic downturn, this kind of a project seems to me on its face to have potential to help, at least locally, dig people out maybe a little bit faster. So I echo my colleagues' initial support of the concept, but I would, have a question for you is about timelines. I guess what are your timelines internally? What are you hoping for from us in terms of responses? And I know we have the next scheduled town meeting scheduling would be next May, so I don't know how that fits with your schedule.
Yeah, so in terms of timelines, it's a little bit determined by the factors you just mentioned, the world economic climate in our business and the spend rate at which we can do this, but we certainly would like to start soon down the road on this project. I think the rate at which the whole thing's completed would be a little bit determined by our business status at the time. Another comment?
And maybe an imprudent question, but what the heck, I'll say it anyway. Is you mentioned on the outset that you have in the past had discussions with, or maybe you're having present discussions with other cities and communities, maybe locally and maybe worldwide, and that there have been overtures or incentives made available to you. Would you be willing at some point to have a substantive discussion about what kind of incentives either are being made or that you'd be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can do that. We do have one on another project in Ireland that we had to keep confidential, so we signed confidentiality agreements on that. But I think we can give you in general terms, kind of what we're looking for. Clearly, I would tell you that the senior management's bias is to do it in Wilmington. We definitely want to do it here. We think this is kind of the epicenter of what ADI does. And we just need, I think, a little bit of help, to get the numbers to work out to make sense for us.
Okay, very well. For my purposes, I've written down some notes, and I'm sure that I missed about 90% of what you said. So at some point, if you were able to either summarize a document or provide the manager with something to help us sort of digest it. It's new to me, so I would like to be able to study it a little bit more substantively. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I agree. Good presentation, a lot of information, and I also appreciate you guys bringing it to the town, down here today. Looking forward to working with you in the future.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up to Selectman Shampoo's question and comment regarding timelines, understanding that business is changing all the time, and understanding that you have certain milestones that you'd like to meet. In terms of the board giving some sort of response to your request, what's your projected timeline on that? Ideally, what would you like to have happen in terms of that piece of it? And is this something that you think the board should be able to evaluate in a month, or do you think it takes 6 months? What's your take on it?
Well, I mean, Ira can talk further about this, but I think our bias is to have it sooner rather than later. If we are going to do it in Wilmington, we actually do want to get started very soon with the initial phases of the project.
Yeah, I would just add that a project of this type, with respect to the campus, the logistics, and the size of that structure, a 250,000 square foot structure, which is what we're thinking about for the first phase. This is a multi-year construction project, so sooner would be better to know where we're going to do this, so we can start down the engineering and architecture and design aspects of it, which would be, of course, the first phases. But this is a multi-year concept, even if we went as fast as we could possibly go. And the faster we know where we're going to do this, the faster we can start down that path, particularly with respect to the engineering and architecture aspects.
Okay, the answer is always as soon as we can. I guess if I could look to Skip and ask you, Skip, what would the impact be on the town? And if you don't have an answer for that tonight, what kind of turnaround time should we expect for that kind of analysis?
Well, I think I would just echo what the town manager said in terms of the scope of this project. I've been here 20 years, and this would dwarf anything that we've done in the past. Currently, Analog pays approximately $1.3 million in property taxes a year. The first phase would bring in an additional $2.5 million, and upon completion, upwards of $5 million in additional tax revenue. I think that the first decision that we have to make is whether we're interested in establishing an economic target area. And I think that's a discussion that we have to have. And I think that we have to have perhaps a more candid discussion with Analog in terms of their timelines as well.
Okay. All right, I guess at least in terms of how the board will proceed, I would say that the first order of business from the board standpoint, in order to take this up at a future meeting, will be for the company to discuss more fully with the manager and the principal assessor. Let's get down to brass tacks on a timeline, and we'll ask that those folks assisting the town come to the board and make a recommendation as to A, what they view to be an appropriate course of action, and B, the timeline that the board should look to do that. That makes sense to everybody here? Yeah. Okay. It does. Is there anything you want to add, Mike, that hasn't been discussed?
Just one question for Peter. If you could explain the, I guess two things. One is the economic target area, that whether or not we need to ask for the entire town, or whether we can do it specific to the area in which Analog is talking about their expansion plans. And then secondly, the whole issue regarding the state's involvement. And what is the driving force or the philosophy behind the fact that the state will only give a tax incentive if the town provides a tax incentive, even though the state is going to become the beneficiary of whatever ultimately takes place?
Well, let's start with the economic target area question. There is a mechanism by which, if it is determined by your demographic research that the town will not qualify to become an economic target area, and there are 11 qualifying criteria, if it is determined after doing the demographic research that the town of Wilmington does not qualify under any of those qualifying criteria, then there is a way to petition the Secretary of Economic Development to designate their property as an exceptional opportunity area. That you would have to write down in a letter signed by you that you've done the exhaustive research, and that after that research and it has been determined that the town does not qualify under any of the 11 criteria. It hasn't really happened that way except for once in the last 5 years. So we can cross that bridge as we go. As far as whether or not the town or the state would be the beneficiary, well, I think that certainly there's, it's our opinion that everybody benefits if the company expands in Wilmington, but there is, I guess the question, and I'm thinking that you're asking, will the state participate if in fact there's no participation? And that has to be determined by the board, the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council. And that is something that happens well after we've determined whether or not A, the town qualifies to become an economic target area, and if in fact you do, this board would need to vote whether or not to move this to town meeting. If in fact your town meeting approved it, we would move it forward. If it did not, then we'd actually be back at the point of moving it without real estate tax relief to the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council.
I don't want my question to be misconstrued. I'm not suggesting that the town not participate. In fact, I'm leaning towards the other way, that the town should get involved because of the scope of this project and the company that we're dealing with. But I was just getting the impression from you that the state's activity would only be contingent upon the town, but you seem to be saying that's not the case.
No, it's a locally driven program, so the town is actually the gatekeeper of the program. We would act after this board and after your town meeting. We would bring it to the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council. Now, I will be working with you all the way through the process to usher the project through, but ultimately the state's Economic Assistance Coordinating Council will be the last board to act. This board, your town meeting, and then the Economic Assistance Coordinating Council.
Just as a, and maybe I'm missing something in the answer to that question. Is it that the Economic Assistance Council, did I get the name of the council correct, but does the council, is the council empowered to provide tax relief to the applicant even if the local board, in this case town meeting, even if the town doesn't approve it? Is it legally empowered to do that? I understand you to say that it's not happened, that they haven't taken action without the town taking action first. Theoretically, at least, is that possible?
Yes.
Okay.
One quick question, if I may, as a follow-up. We talked about economic target area. Can you tell me in general terms what defines a community as an economic target area? What does that entitle you? How would Wilmington be different if, besides analog, if we were to be deemed an economic target area? What changes?
Well, you would be then certainly able to use the Economic Development Incentive Program as outlined tonight. Also, the town would be eligible to capitalize on brownfields tax credits that would be eligible through a quasi-public agency called Mass Development. So I don't know if you have any contaminated properties, but if you do, they could be, there could be some assistance in cleaning them up. And lastly, there's some financing agencies that lend only in economic target areas or economically distressed areas, and those are interchangeable names. I don't like using acronyms, EDA, ETA, but those are very government, I apologize, but there is some financing quasi-public agencies that would then be authorized to lend in the town of Wilmington if in fact you were designated as an economic target area.
Thank you.
Anything else from the board? Do we have any questions or comments from the audience? Mr. McDonald.
No, there's no financial institution, but we do have enough cash on the balance sheet to manage this out of the banks.
Question, with regard to brownfield development on your site, is it considered a contaminated site, a brownfield location?
I use the term brownfield. That's an additional incentive that would be eligible to the whole town if, in fact, the town became an economic target area. There's brownfield tax credits, there's potential loans. Banks won't lend to contaminated properties, but Mass Development, a quasi-public lending agency, can actually lend to a contaminated site. It's one of the few lending authorities that actually will do that, but it can only happen in an economic target area or economically distressed area, which is an interchangeable name for an economic target area. I don't know, by the way, I'm not saying, I honestly don't know that there's any contaminated sites in the town of Wilmington. It's just another incentive that is opened up if, in fact, the town were an economic target area.
And let me just clarify, for the analog devices property, for the analog devices property, it is not a contaminated site, if that was part of your question.
You mentioned some numbers with regard to tax relief. I heard the numbers 5 to 100%. I thought you were paying in the range of $20 per thousand now in taxes. Is that correct?
The Mr. Chairman,
Please do.
The tax increment financing agreement is real estate tax relief based on the increased value. So any real estate taxes that are being paid currently would be protected. The town would receive 100% of the value that it's receiving. But the increased value, so any increased taxes that the town would collect, the town could conceivably partner with the company and provide between 5 and 100% of that value in relief back to the company.
So, just so I'm understanding this, right now it's like probably $20 to $22 per thousand, I think you're being charged for in tax assessment. Is there a target number that you're looking for the town to cooperate with you so that it makes it a doable project?
Mr. Chair?
If you would like to speak to a target number, that's fine. I would only direct a comment to the speaker and indicate to you, Ms. McDonald, that the town would be a participant in that, and the town would have its own targets. So certainly these folks are welcome to answer that question. But
Mr. Chair, there's the actual tax collection number doesn't change. It's the actual collection. The collection number per thousand does not change. To your question, the number of the $20, if it's $20 per thousand, that doesn't change.
Could you explain to us how it works as far as relief from taxation? If it doesn't change as far as that value or that percentage, and also how this would affect or impact us with other industrial properties as far as setting a precedent or opening our town up for to litigation from other companies who maybe been denied tax evasion.
if I could, let me jump in on that question, gentlemen. With respect to the second part of your question, that really ought to be directed towards the town. And I didn't notice when you joined us, but earlier in the meeting, Mr. Kyra had indicated that certainly this is a precedent for the town should the town choose to pursue this tax incentive program. And the town would be mindful of the fact that it would be precedent setting. So I think fairly that's directed at the town. As to your first question, I'd be happy to defer to these gentlemen.
Yeah, I think, as was answered before, the amount that we might in the end talk about would be a discussion with the town, and a detailed discussion with the town. Obviously, as large as we can possibly determine between us would certainly help us make that decision more expeditiously. But I think that's something we would determine talking to the town about what would be, you know, a mutually acceptable and mutually beneficial state of affairs.
Thank you.
That you brought up the fact that the question needs to be addressed to the town. For you, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if this is a question for Mr. Monahan, but the question is, other industrial properties may have been filing for tax abatements. If they've been denied, and we give this company tax relief, does that open up the town to litigation to people that were denied tax abatements?
Certainly will confer with counsel on that, but I can tell you from my perspective, the simple answer is no, insofar as this is a specific regulatory alternative and a process by which an individual taxpayer or company can proceed based on the guidelines of the program. So on its face, going through that process is what enables a company to pursue a tax incentive like this without violating the Equal Protection Clause or any other constitutional requirement. But rest assured, if we go down that road, counsel will be involved in that discussion.
The last question, relative to the approval of the town meeting. You mentioned that the next town meeting is, say, next May. The gentleman who is the chief financial officer suggested that the town's approval would be best for them to be sooner rather than later. Is it possible, if this is looked upon favorably by the town and there's a mutual agreement of cooperation, that a special town meeting could vote on this, or does it specifically have to go to the annual town meeting according to our charter or any other?
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. I thought the question was over. I'm not familiar with the specific regulations that govern this and whether or not it has to be an annual town meeting, but I can tell you there's nothing in the town charter, and I would be very surprised if there were anything in the regulation that prohibited the town from calling a special town meeting to take up the matter. Okay? Thank you. I'm sorry. Oh, yes.
Thank you. The only question I have is, we're talking a number of jobs, and the gentleman from the state here is saying they're jobs for the state. Is there any way that the town of Wilmington could guarantee a percentage of jobs for Wilmington residents under your charter?
Please.
Actually, there's no way of guaranteeing that they go to Wilmington residents. However, there is a way of building in some language whereby the jobs are advertised in the town first, a period of time, whether it be 2 weeks, and then after that 2-week period, if the perfect candidate hasn't been identified, then they're advertised elsewhere. That's very common language that I oftentimes recommend is built into language in TIF agreement, tax increment financing agreements. So that's the best protection that the state can recommend built into these documents. It's a jump start on the jobs.
All right, seeing no other questions from the audience, I'd just thank you, gentlemen, for coming. Certainly, any additional information that you want to provide to the board, provided through the manager's office, we'll be proactively seeking the counsel of our principal assessor and our planning director and various administrative people, and be preparing a response of some kind.
Well, thank you. Mr. Chairman, rest of the board, Mr. Town Manager, and the rest of the town officials, we really appreciate your consideration and look forward to working with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And seeing that our school committee has joined us for our 7:45 agenda item, which is a joint meeting between the Board of Selectmen and the school committee regarding an update on the status of the high school building project. We have our professional design team, engineers and legal counsel with us this evening. I'd like to give those folks an opportunity to be seated at the front table and up towards the front row or two. And while folks do that, having formally called the joint meeting to order, I wanted to just recognize for folks who might be in attendance or watching at home who the professional design team and technical support team is. We have the project manager, Stuart Lesser, who's the principal of Jocelyn Lesser and Associates. William Cuniff is the project manager for Jocelyn Lesser. Our architect and design team at Dorr and Whittier Architects, we have Don Walters here as the principal and John Richardson as the project architect. The engineers on the design team at Niche Engineering include Sandra Brock as the chief engineer and Lisa Brothers as the president and CEO of Niche Engineering. I believe we also have the town's one or both LSPs in attendance. Could I have some help with that one? Yeah. Okay, Ralph Teller from Lord Associates, and then we have the general contractor Gilbane Company represented by Michael Marcella, and we have we do have both, thank you. The licensed site professionals for the town, as I had indicated, Nicholas Laney from HML Incorporated and Ralph Teller from Lord Associates, thank you. And then also in attendance is Attorney Dan Deutsch with the Office of Deutsch Williams, Wilmington's Town Council. For folks in the audience, certainly this is an exciting project for the town. Tonight's joint meeting was called really for two different and related purposes. The first purpose for calling this meeting is to give a general update to the town relative to the progress of the high school project, and specifically to update the town on the latest design development changes in progress. Then secondly, we want to update the town about the appeals to DEP, which in substance are appeals from a decision by the local Conservation Commission to the Department of Environmental Protection. It's our hope and expectation this evening to provide an explanation of both the substance of those appeals and the procedure as to how those appeals work in its current stage, and if those appeals move forward, the next level that process can go to. Certainly, having been through a number of public meetings and forums in different places and before different boards and committees, I've witnessed the discussion on this matter to be at all times civil. Fully expect that will be the case again this evening. I fully expect that we'll all give each other the opportunity to speak, make comment, and ask questions, and anything beyond that would be ruled out of order. If I could now, and as a word as to how the program will proceed this evening, we are first going to have our professional team give us an update, as I just outlined and summarized. We'll then go to the school committee and the Board of Selectmen and any administrative officials here at the front to ask any questions and make comment, and then we'll certainly give folks in the audience the opportunity to either make comment or ask questions. And we'll be as efficient as we can, but we understand that there's a number of folks here, so we'll make sure that people have an opportunity to speak, and we'll ask folks to be considerate of the time that they spend. Is there anything, Mike, that I'm... That's a good question. In terms of our professional team here, we had hoped and expected that Stuart and Niche Engineering and Dorr Whittier would have a representative at the front table. You can share that microphone, and that microphone certainly is accessible to the entire team should it become appropriate to respond to any questions. Let me just ask John. John, do you think we need to dim the lights, or do you think that this presentation will be... Okay, please.
Chairperson, Mrs. Chairwoman. Thank you for giving us the opportunity to update you on the project. And I think an update is probably overdue. We're in the middle of our construction documents, and we'll be finished those shortly after the end of the summer. We're hoping to have the whole bid set out on October 1st. So we're right in the middle of design.
And John, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can everybody in the audience hear the speaker? Okay, if we could, do I have it right that that's a TV microphone and this is a microphone?
They're all in.
I'll speak up. How about that?
Better.
If you
Thank
want to
you.
use that one.
Wasn't sure of the pickup. So I thank you for the opportunity to update both committees on where we are with the building project. We are in the midst of design, what we call construction documents. We'll be finishing that shortly after the end of the summer. So I'd like to, tonight we'd like to give you an overview of where the building itself is, since this is a school project, an update of the site design, and we'll get into the appeals process and where we are with permitting about that. And also, Mike Barcella from Gilbane will talk a bit about schedule, the impacts, both current and potential, as we look forward. For the building, we'll start with the ground up. Actually, in this case, the half basement. The lower level, the locker rooms are underneath the gymnasium. They're half buried, so that's a very efficient use of space, but it doesn't take up much footprint. The site overall actually grades 8 feet down as you head towards the stadium. So we designed it with the first floor basically at grade out by where the current tennis courts are. And as you carry that grade back, it becomes 8 feet in the air, allowing us to have a partially submerged basement for the locker rooms. The first floor here is the main floor with the public spaces. Here's the gymnasium with the locker rooms underneath. The auditorium is next to it. Administration and guidance are here at the front. This is Church Street. We'll get to the site design, but car drop-off and main parking are down to the south here. A bus drop-off is out to the west, as well as the parking on Middlesex Ave the students use. So students coming by their own car or by bus will enter through the main entrance. Students who are dropped off will enter it through one of the 2 southern entrances. This entrance here, the southeast entrance, we call that the public events entrance. That will be used by the public when there's an event in either or both the auditorium, the gymnasium, or even the cafeteria. And there's doors here and here so that this back portion of the gym back portion of the school can be partitioned and opened up separately from the larger portions should you be open late in the evening. Other main features of the first floor are the media center, library, as you walk right in. There's a large courtyard, I'll get to that kind of anchors the school project. And then the other end of the courtyard is the cafeteria, so nice connection. The cafeteria can also double as a lobby for either events in the gymnasium or the auditorium. The balance of the first floor are SPED, the kitchen, the arts, CAD, and then there's a media production room, which is a multi-purpose room that will be available for distance learning or small student performances. And the upper 2 floors, it's a 3-story building. The upper 2 floors are the main classroom floors. This is a 21st century school. The key element is to cluster general classrooms around a pair of small group spaces that can be either used by the teacher or by students themselves in instruction. They're observable from the classrooms. And so the school is no longer going to be divided by department, but by these clusters that can take on their own identity, be it by year, by theme, by subject. The specifics of the learning communities are to be determined and can evolve, but the overall plan allows that flexibility where you'll have 4 clusters per floor, 8 for the overall building. Science will remain separate just because of the nature of the utilities. So that's on the west side of the building on 2 floors. You have science labs paired around a prep room. These are much larger and, in terms of utilities, fully equipped science labs as opposed to the existing ones. There's also a fitness room and an indoor elevated track in the gym up on the 2nd floor. And the 3rd floor is pretty much the same. What was a fitness room is 2 business classrooms. And there's a larger lab over by science, but otherwise the classrooms are the same. Just to highlight a couple of the more exceptional spaces, this is a plan and a quick view of the auditorium. It's going to have, with all of its loose seats as well as wheelchair spaces, it could hold up to 676 people in it. It's going to be raised, what we call tier seating in the back. It'd be fully accessible, but that allows the back half here to have a better view, sight lines as they look towards the stadium, towards the stage. There's another view. This is a rendering of what it would look like if you were sitting in the auditorium looking up, and this is a small snapshot of a recently completed auditorium that which gives you some of the sense of what it actually looks like when the catwalk and the lights and the acoustical shells and everything is all fit out. Wilmington's auditorium, as opposed to Rockland's, which we recently did, Wilmington's will have a full fly loft that will allow complete stage sets to be lifted and held behind. So, as well as an orchestra pit is a bid alternate. So if the bids go well, you'll have the full deal. And as I mentioned, the courtyard is really the anchor of the building, the jewel in the heart. It's a design element to allow classrooms on the inside to have natural daylighting, but it also becomes a real focal point. There's a hardscape path that leads from media center to cafeteria. All the rooms on the perimeter open up to it, be it the media center, the cafeteria, the home ec room, and the 3 art rooms all open up to that. So the classrooms can engage it and students can use it themselves on off hours. This is a view from the balcony outside the fitness room. There's a small balcony on either end because the media center and the cafeteria are slightly larger than the floors above. We also have some renderings to show you, give you a better feel of what it's going to look like. We're closing in on the brick design. We have a simulated stone base with both a rough texture and a smooth texture to kind of provide a nice foundation base to the building. There's a cornice at the top. There's a metal roof screen which hides the mechanical units. There are 12 rooftop units, very large mechanical units up on the roofs that you probably don't want to look at. So we have screening to hide that. And this is the formal entrance, of course, administration guidance, the name of the school right over the doors. You come around the corner, Church Street is behind us. You can see the first of those 2 southern entrances. This is a little bit of the student drop-off loop, and this is the bus loop here. Get a sense of the scale. This is one of the stair tower as it goes up. And here's the view from the south. This will be the large on-site parking. There's 174 parking spaces on site total when you include the ones in front of the building and here. You can see how the elevation kind of emphasizes the small learning community, so they read as separate volumes with teacher planning, sped resource in between. Yeah. Final site design, just want to go over, you can go to the next slide. Where we ended up in terms of site design, we have had several hearings with Concom and talked to local residents, made some changes, but I think that's only served to improve the site design. We're preserving the baseball field, although we're making some modifications to improve it. We'll be shifting the infield out about 15 feet. We'll be removing the creosote wall and the warning track, kind of regrading the back, putting a new fence in. As part of our discussions with Concom and local residents, we are going to daylight an existing drainage pipe that mostly serves off-site drainage. We're going to daylight that and do some on-site mitigation, which Sandra Brock will describe in more detail. And we're going to remove the current paving that's there. We are, well, Don's finding that. Because the building is going over what the existing softball field is now, up on Wildwood, we will be doing a new multi-purpose, multi-use field that will both serve lacrosse, field hockey, practice soccer, and has a softball backstop. So multiple uses. That's a natural turf field, as is the baseball. The stadium itself, a part of this project is to put synthetic turf in the stadium to allow more intensive use of that field. Here's the parking for staff mainly. This is the car drop-off loop. There's a much longer area, so there'll be plenty of opportunity for cars to queue and drop off, much better than the current situation. Bus loop is separate. Here's the bus loop right off Church Street. So that separates car and vehicle traffic, provides for good circulation, and pedestrians, students can move in between without having to cross either traffic to get to the basketball court or tennis courts. So that's where we are in the site. There may be some questions later on, and we'll come back to that, but just in the appeal, there were questions about the AUL. This is the boundary delineated in the AUL with the existing building shown in red. So you can see that the AUL area is underneath the existing building, but separate from the new proposed building. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Sandy.
If I could, Sandra, excuse me. What I'd like to do, if it doesn't throw you folks too much, is to entertain questions and comments from the board and the committee, if any, regarding that presentation, then hear your presentation, and then we'll go through that process again. Members of the audience, we will give you the opportunity to comment or question both segments, but in order to keep it proceeding, we're gonna break it up here and then have one question and answer session for the audience. So with that, do we have any questions or comments from the committee or the board? All set.
Do me a favor and define daylight of a pipe.
Actually, that's fairly straightforward. Just for the record, I'm Sandy Brock with Niche Engineering. When we say daylighting of a pipe, it's basically taking an underground pipe, exposing it, and reestablishing a stream bed to it. There's a lot of environmental benefits of doing that, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute.
Thank you.
So.
Very good. Thank you.
All right. So generally, what I'm going to do is go through the proposed site. John's already touched upon a lot of the things that we did through the permitting process. I'm going to do a brief discussion about why we went through that process, the actual resource areas on the site, and then indicate how we went through the Conservation Commission process and the approvals that we've gotten and where we are today. So when you look at the site, John's already talked about the new building, the existing football stadium, which is being converted from a natural turf field to a synthetic turf field, and the proposed parking. So on site, under the Wetlands Protection Act, there's a series of resource areas. They include bordering vegetated wetlands and riverfront in this area. This line here, this blue line here, is the 200-foot riverfront area. Talk a little bit more about that in a moment. There's also a bordering vegetated wetland on the north side of the site. In that bordering vegetated wetlands is a series of vernal pools. A vernal pool is simply a habitat area that has a certain characteristics that provide a very unique habitat. There's also an area of isolated land subject to flooding. Within that isolated land subject to flooding is also another vernal pool. This red line here is the 100-foot buffer zone, and that's to the bordering vegetated wetlands. A buffer zone is a jurisdictional line. So we have this jurisdictional line, this 100-foot buffer to this wetlands, and then we have the riverfront area. So whenever you work with any of these resource areas or within a buffer area, we have to go through a process with the Conservation Commission, and we have to submit what's called a notice of intent. On this particular project, even though this football field here is existing and is being replaced with synthetic turf, under the Riverfronts Act, which is why we're going to go through some of these processes in just a moment. I'll show you some off-site mitigation. Within the riverfront area, anything that has no topsoil is considered degraded. So when you take this natural turf field, which has topsoil, and you replace it with a synthetic turf field, which has sand base and a carpet on top of that, and you replace that and you take topsoil out, it's then called degraded. So under the State Wetlands Protection Act, you have to deal with that being degraded. Now, you already have a certain amount of degraded area on site because it's an existing school. So it started out as an existing school, it's going to end up as a new school, but we still have some impacts because of this degraded area. John already talked about the existing bus loop down here. That's existing degraded. We're actually going to replace that, naturalize it. That's where that daylight of the piping is going. All of that's an enhancement, a restoration of that area. That's all to have restoration of degraded area on site. And I won't get into all the details. There's a difference between on-site and off-site of the ratio of 1-to-1 on-site, 1-to-2 off-site. But we have to go through a process where anything that is increase of degraded area has to be compensated or restored on-site. So this is the main area of restoration on-site. And then we have some off-site issues also. One of the things that John did point out is that the Wildwood parking lot over here was originally going to be a typical impervious asphalt pavement, and it has been replaced by a porous system. This was discussed at the public hearing. This was part of the effort to work with the different members of the community who are concerned about this site to kind of address some of their concerns. And at this point, and at the conclusion of the public hearing process, everyone was pretty on board with the project, thought this design was appropriate, and that the town had done well in doing the restoration and providing mitigation for the work within the riverfront. So at that point, the Conservation Commission then issued an order of conditions, which is basically the approval for the permit that we submitted. And as part of that approval, we then have to do off-site mitigation. As I just explained, the whole issue with degraded on-site, we had to then look outside of that site because we didn't have enough area to restore on-site. Then we went through, and the town and the design team looked through different various locations. One of them is a pedway at the Wildwood School. Another is a parking lot at the town park. So through the process of the Conservation Commission hearings, we established that these off-site restoration areas for the degraded riverfront were appropriate and were approved and included in the order of condition, again, the approval. So once the order of conditions was issued, and there's a 10-day appeal period, and then we had 2 appeals. One is from 10 residential residents, and one is from the one abutter. So just to kind of give a quick timeline is that, you know, we had the order of conditions issued. Within the 10-day appeal period, it was then appealed. And then where we're at now is that we have a process, and that's appealed to DEP, Department of Environmental Protection, at the state level. They have a process where they can look at the order of conditions, and then they will issue what's called a superseding order of condition, which reaffirms what the Conservation Commission has already done and may address any other issues that were brought up. Last week, we went through and did what's called a DEP site walk for the appeal. We were out there, the design team, members of the town, the appellants, and a representative from DEP to discuss this. A lot of the issues on site were discussed. In general, a portion of the people who were appealing it were concerned with how some of the orders were actually written, that they weren't concise enough and they needed some clarifications. In general, a portion of the appellants, just a portion of them, actually did not have a lot of issues with the project, and they felt the town and the design of the school had done appropriate measures to mitigate the impacts to the resource areas for the wetlands under the Wetlands Protection Act. So the next step here is that we will wait for a superseding order of conditions. So we've had our site walk. We will then get a letter from DEP outlining the results of the site walk. I think we have a fairly good idea of what's going to be coming. Once that's done, we will resubmit any information they require. Within 2 or 3 weeks, they will issue a superseding order of conditions. You're looking at probably the end of June period of time for that to get issued. Once that is issued, then there's again another 10-day appeal period. So this process is all outlined within the Wetlands Protection Act. So it is a common process that we're going through right now. If we get to the next level, and if it is, you know, appealed again, And then there's a potential of going to what's called a judiciary hearing, which is a quasi-legal process. If you have questions, we can get into that a little bit more. We're hoping to avoid that by working with some of the residents and coming up with an appropriate superseding order. DEP is open to comments, and they're willing to work with both the town and the appellants to the project. Once that's done, there's that 10-day appeal period, and then we wait to see if it gets appealed again. If there's any further questions on that, we can kind of go to the next step, which is talking about schedule. So.
Did you want to ask any questions of that, or would you like to go right into the schedule next?
Why don't we go into scheduling, and then we'll see how long that takes if we feel like we can handle that information efficiently.
Hi, Michael Marcella, Gilbane Building Company.
Good evening.
The project as we took a look at it, we divided it up into multiple phases. Given the size and the sensitivity of the existing building and keeping construction and the existing building operational, we looked at multiple phases. In the first phase, the original idea was that construction or renovation of the existing football field would occur, as well as establishing a laydown area off of Wildwood. So Wildwood Street's over here, Church Street is here. And, part of phase one, that the idea there was to isolate, separate that, and also create a laydown area. Our potential site office would be the existing house that's on Wildwood. In phase 1A, we would morph into a larger area as the football field renovation was completing. We would still keep our laydown area and try to maintain access to the site via Wildwood. In phase 1A, this would occur, the plan was that would occur after students were out of school. And that begins with the demolition of the existing gymnasium. So we would establish a fence line, which will ultimately create the footprint of where the new building will be constructed. But in order to construct the new building, we have to take the existing gymnasium out. And I just want to make one comment. There's here in this dotted line is a project that would be outside of Gilbane's scope of work, which is a sewer extension, which would bring sewer to the site. In phase 2, this is the construction of the new school. Now we've already, as we indicated in phase 1A, defined the construction site with the fencing area as well as the laydown area. Thought would be at that point the football field would be renovated with the new synthetic turf. And we would be excavating and constructing the new school within phase 2. Pedestrian access is identified here. Once the gymnasium is demoed, we would construct a safe access to allow people to get from Church Street to the football or baseball fields while construction is going on at the new school, and still maintaining access and operation with the existing school. Upon the completion of the new school, when that is turned over, we would modify and change the site to allow, in a sense, student access at the end of the summer 2014. And at that point, we would then begin to isolate off the site where the existing school is. We would still maintain the Wildwood Street area because now we would be converting that into the softball field that was mentioned earlier. Now, to speak to the schedule at the top, the original schedule, highlighted in green. This was our plan, as was recently identified when we went through, and to John's point earlier, the design is continued, and that's reflected as well. We basically, in a high-level view of the schedule, the town vote occurred at the end of last year, and then funding as well as the design continues. Our expectation was stadium upgrades would have begun this past week, and then gymnasium demolition would begin in earnest after the 4th of July activities, after 4th of July festivities. And then what the students would expect to see coming back to school would be no gymnasium and the construction fence around the site. And at that point, we would begin with the excavation and the starting of the construction of the new school. The original plan was starting that in the third quarter, so it's potentially July, August timeframe, and completing that for turnover late May of 2014. And then that would allow the move-in of furniture, fixtures, equipment, and teachers' personal belongings, so then come the end of August of 2014, students would be in the new school. At the same time, we would then look at the last portion, which is the demolition of the former school, and then the construction of the parking area that John and Sandy mentioned, as well as tennis courts and basketball court. The current situation that we have, the area in green still represents the schedule has been intact and whole, with one slight wrinkle, which is the latest appeal to the NOI that Sandy had mentioned earlier with regard to the submission to the Conservation Commission for the construction of the football field and, in a sense, the whole site. So what we've tried to do in inputting this into our schedule is to calculate what kind of an impact that would have to the project. So the areas in yellow are reflecting, in a sense, what we originally figured was going to start now will be, as Sandy mentioned, part of the appeal. So there was the June 7th walkthrough with DEP to look at the site. Potentially, we're expecting, if in fact the superseding order of conditions or an enhancement to the existing are issued, then stadium work would progress, it would slide, and potentially we would be looking for that to start in the third quarter of this year, or it would start potentially 1 month later than originally expected. We thought Monday after graduation is when we would start. Now it wouldn't begin until after 4th of July. So we've, in a sense, the project has slipped a month, as well as the gymnasium demolition. That would also slide out. Now, what that does to the school project is we inserted into our schedules that it basically shifts out a month. The idea, though, is that we would still have the school ready for the start of the 2014 school year. The only difference is instead of turning it over at late May of 2014, it would, in a sense, be turned over, and this would be substantially complete in July. And what that does on the back end of the schedule is it slides us out a little. We're referencing that in red. And that is on the back end when we're constructing the tennis courts and the parking lot. Part of those activities will now slide into the winter time later than we originally expected. So that would bring us into the spring. Our expectation is there's potentially spring plantings that would have to happen in 2015. By shifting that month, that's what currently is calculating out on our schedule. That's if there is the current single appeal to the DEP. The next slide is a comparison between what we just saw in the single appeal to the DEP, and if, as John and Sandy mentioned, there were some further activities with regard to the notice of intent. If there were, in fact, a second appeal to what the DEP issues as a superseding order of conditions, I mean, we're predicting that second appeal would be reviewed and then would go to adjudicatory hearing. Now, in a best-case scenario, we plugged in a 6-month duration to see what that would do to the schedule. And unfortunately, a six-month duration pushes most out into the winter of 2013, the start of 2013. At that point, to construct the football field in February or to tear down the gymnasium in February, it doesn't benefit the project at that point. We wouldn't be able to excavate the football field. So in a sense, that 6-month best-case scenario, we looked at that as to what would be the most efficient for the project. In a sense, the project would slide out an entire year from our expectation. So those are the assumptions we made in trying to estimate that in the schedule. And that's where we're currently sitting. We've speculated on 2 different scenarios. One is if all goes well and there is an superseding order of conditions that's not appealed, and then, like I said, if there is going to adjudicatory hearing in a 6-month period.
Stuart?
I might add to that that the 1-month delay that we've talked about not only can be accommodated, but carries a little bit of cost because we're pushing out the schedule a little bit, but not in light of the entire budget, it won't be significant. If we are to move out an entire year, particularly in the marketplace as we see it, which has a lot of there's a lot of changes occurring, that we're now seeing inflation back in the construction costs, and we're looking at something close to $3 million at this point. And again, that's making some assumptions about what happens as we move out into 2013 and 14. Parts will be bid later, the construction will go on longer, and so we're looking at some significant costs, and I think it's important to identify those, and so we have.
If I could, when you say increase could be close to $3 million, using some assumptions, what assumptions are we talking about?
Well, we're looking at, we're making some guesses about inflation. I mean, that's the big one. We're seeing right today, over the last couple of years have been, for those who are building projects, have been very good, because we have seen really no inflation, and in fact, costs coming in below really what the market should be. So if you're building a project, that's been very good, even though we were all living through a down economy, and for those who clearly are unemployed and not working, that's difficult. But from those who are buying projects, in a sense, and building projects, the numbers have been very good. We are now seeing those numbers increase. And so we're making an assumption that we're probably looking at 5%, in the neighborhood of around 5%. It could be a little bit less, and it could be more, again, if the economy really starts to pick up. That's one of the unknowns.
Okay. As I had indicated earlier, we're going to go to the Board of Selectmen and the School Committee for some questions or comments. If I could, though, before we do that, ask representatives from either niche or from Town Council's office, if you could comment on when we talk about a best-case scenario 6-month delay if it goes to an adjudicatory hearing, could one or both of you comment on how that process works, the adjudicatory hearing stage? And then secondly, if you could give us an update on the substantive questions that were ferreted out at the site plan visit, and kind of where you, if you could assess and tell us where we're at with this appeal, please.
Sure. I'm going to just start with the current appeal and look at what we talked about at the DEP site visit and the site walk. And in general, there's different people who are appealing for different reasons. And I don't know how much detail you want me to get into, but some of the people who are signed on as 10 residents is a group known as the Headwater Stream Team. And a lot of their concerns had been addressed during the public hearing process through conservation. And that is the different things the town did, like the restoration area, the daylighting of the pipe, the changing the parking lot at Wildwood to a porous system. What they had put into the appeal as their issues had to do with how the order of conditions were written, and that they needed some clarification and some more definition. And I'll give you one example, and that is the off-site restoration I had indicated. In the order of conditions issued by the Wilmington Conservation Commission, they indicated that they would start in the spring of 2013. It was their feeling that that was fine, but they wanted it more of a controlled, being an end date, that they wanted it to have a little bit more clarification on that process of how the off-site mitigation would happen. Also, they want to see, there was, as an example, the porous pavement, which was offered up by the town during the public hearing process, was not on the plans that we were discussing that night. They want to see them on the plans. So when we look at the site, how it's designed, the function of the site, there's no substantial changes going on. It is clarifications of certain orders, conditions, but there isn't any changes that were not discussed during the public hearing process. The restoration area is still the same. The synthetic turf is still the same. So all those things are staying the same. Those are the things that are within the jurisdiction of the riverfront. So those items are not changed, so it's really a clarification in making some of the orders more concise. That's really what we're talking about with that particular group. Another signatory of the appeal had questions about the AUL, and we can go into that. Obviously, the design team in the town has done their due diligence with having the correct professionals on the design team to go through that so that the design of the project is appropriate for that AUL that's John indicated earlier. So right now, we've gone through that. We're expecting to get a letter from DEP. Once we receive that, we'll submit the information. Within a couple weeks, we'll have a superseding order of conditions. If it's not appealed during that 10-day appeal period, then we go to the next. If it is appealed to an adjudicatory hearing, then a whole nother process starts. And I'm going to look at town council a little bit to help out some of the procedure. I've gone through this process before. In general, the first thing that happens is that there's a meeting with DEP and all the appellants to see if there is a way to resolve those issues and also to identify the specific issues that are of concern. And then there goes into a process, and at this point, I'll turn it over to town councils because he could probably get the legal kind of process, have a better definition of that. So.
Can everyone hear the speaker?
Is that all right? No?
Now we can.
More than enough. Good evening.
Good evening.
An adjudicatory hearing is the second level of appeal, and I'm not sure I need one actually. It's known as a quasi-judicial appeal. It approximates proceedings in a court of law, and it's foreshortened somewhat because the direct testimony of each of the witnesses is presented first of all in writing, and the cross-examination of the witnesses is conducted in person as it would be in court. The DEP has a standing order that establishes a guideline for the completion of the process. Requires the process be completed within 1 year. However, there are interim goals. Within 1 month after the appeal is lodged, there is a pre-screening conference. The purpose of that conference is to identify the substantive issues and the technical issues that will be addressed during the course of the hearing. Often, parties in their presentation of their positions disagree as to what actually needs to be decided. So the purpose of that preliminary conference is to identify the issues. The hearing officer is designated and establishes basically the framework for the process going forward. There is sometimes also, there's an opportunity for the parties to engage in negotiation that's brokered by the DEP representative, but whether that is conducted or not, there is a further deadline for the hearing. The hearing would take place 4 months into the process. As I've indicated, the testimony takes, first of all, the form of written testimony. The witnesses have to be identified. The witnesses would be primarily expert witnesses. So this would be essentially a battle of the experts, as it's known. Each witness would present in writing detailed testimony and exhibits as they would be presented if it were done in person, and then there is responsive testimony presented. The purpose of the hearing is to allow each of the parties to challenge the assumptions, the facts, and the conclusions of the other witnesses and experts. The hearing may take a matter of days, and within 30 days after that hearing, so that 5 months into the process after the appeal, is the presumptive date for the hearing officer to issue a recommended decision. That's not a final decision. It's subject to review and approval by the commissioner of the DEP. So that final decision that's subject to a potential further appeal to court of law would be issued within 6 months after the appeal, hence the 6-month presumptive period.
Some appeals, because of the scope of the issues, the magnitude of the project, are designated complex cases, and that could drag out the appeal process by a further month. So 6 months is presumptive, but it's not an absolute end date. The process is then technically subject to, well, subject to the possibility of a further appeal with different standards of review, which would be on the basis of the record that's created during the DEP appeal. And that further appeal is taken to Superior Court. And although the standards of review in that process are more limited, as a practical matter, for various reasons, we find that the appeal process drags on many months, perhaps a year or more. It's a rough outline of the appeal process as it exists in the DEP, the second appeal process or request for adjudicatory hearing.
Okay, and the one thing that I was really honed in on there was the comment that you made toward the end of that explanation, which is that 6 months, in the end, 6 months, as was presented as our quote-unquote best-case scenario, is truly best-case scenario. That we could not reasonably expect any result to be forthcoming prior to that, unless the parties found a resolution of the problem.
That's true, with one caveat, and that is that the parties during the adjudicatory appeal can petition for an expedited handling of the appeal. And the DEP regulations establish certain rough standards for consideration of an expedited appeal. The project has to implicate, implicate major, has to have major impact on the community, and the issues have to, it has to be possible to address the issues in a way that's quicker than the typical process. But even then, you may cut a month or so off the process. You jump ahead in line a little bit, in effect.
Okay. Thank you. And we may call on you later to answer questions or comments. Of the 2 licensed site professionals that are here representing the town, it's my understanding that Mr. Teller would likely speak to the general explanation of the AUL, and then Mr. Lanny, the specifics about this particular AUL. Do I have that right, gentlemen? And if I could ask Mr. Teller to explain to the audience what an AUL is, and then, if appropriate, have Mr. Lanny speak to this particular one.
Okay. Well, an activity and use limitation, the AUL, was placed on the property to provide notice to the future parties that residual oil from the spill or cleanup that happened a while back remains in the ground at depth. And if one were to go digging, they will expect to encounter it. That AUL has been recorded on the deed of the property and serves as our guiding document for this future activity or construction process, and requires us to anticipate that if there is any change in use or activity in that area, we have to create a soils management plan to thoughtfully plan out what we'll do with the soil, contaminated soil, in the event we encounter that, and a health and safety plan for the workers. That's basically the process in a nutshell.
Okay. Anything to add, Mr. Lanny?
I can just explain what we did. Can I have the slide that shows? I think it's the next slide.
The other way. The first one up top, one more.
The slide shows in the blue dash line, the limits of the AUL, and then the little green dots, there's 2 kind of in that pink sea there, and then 3 to the south. I think that's the southeast, 4 actually. Those were test borings and monitoring wells that were put in as part of the investigation of the release of fuel oil from the tank that was in the courtyard. And the LSP, we call the LSP of record, who wrote and did the investigation, based on those borings, determined the extent of the AUL and the release of oil. If you see, though, there's a lot of wide spacing on the green and the test borings that were done, and we wanted to increase our level of knowledge about how deep was the oil. The previous investigator said it was about 8 feet. If you went down 8 feet, you'd encounter oil and soil. And we wanted to, and again, we have B3 and 5 in the courtyard, and then we have the other borings on the other side of the cafeteria. So we wanted to see what was in the cafeteria, what was in the courtyard. So we went back and did, I believe, 7 more borings, which are our red dots. And we found that the contaminated soil was maybe 10 to 14 feet below grade and not 8, and that it did not appear to be as extensive as in the original study. So based on the study we did in the AUL, we're able to make some recommendations to the design team that it would be beneficial, economically and environmentally beneficial, if we could plan our work to go no deeper than 8 feet below grade. That way we would know we would avoid encountering this contaminated soil, and therefore save the cost of managing contaminated soil. And it also showed that it was maybe just that it's not as extensive as originally thought. If you look at WEB4, which is in the cafeteria, that we did not find any contamination in that boring. And then there's another red dot there. I think that's 1B. That wasn't contaminated. So I think the study showed that the contamination is deeper than what the AUL anticipated, and maybe not as extensive, which again helped the design team to do the design to minimize encountering that soil during construction.
Okay, and during that construction phase, can you summarize what the responsibilities of the LSP are in this project relative to the AUL? How does that work?
Well, I think the process would be is now we have a design. Okay, when we did our study, we had no design to look at. So an LSP, based on the AUL, the LSP would review the project and determine is it appropriate to prepare a soil management plan, a health and safety plan for workers, and if any of the uses, the proposed uses, are allowed or prohibited by the AUL. Because the AUL spells out certain activities that can occur in the site, and it lists certain activities that are prohibited unless an LSP reviews the use and determines it's not a significant risk to human health. So that's how there's an LSP review that needs to be done before we start construction to comply with what we call the Massachusetts Contingency Plan, which is the state regulation that the LSPs work under.
And if you could, explain the relationship with DEP in that process.
Well, the DEP wrote the regulations called the Mass Contingency Plan, and it spells out what the LSP is supposed to do. So we're going to, you take the regulations, we're going to write an opinion, it gets submitted to DEP. DEP may or may not audit that opinion.
Right, and you have answered the question, and one of the reasons why I asked that question was to make sure that we up here and in the general public had a sense of this process, in that an LSP is ultimately responsible for reviewing the information, and that firm, that person, has a responsibility both in terms of evaluation and reporting, and that DEP is involved in that reporting and evaluation process.
That is correct.
Thank you. Is there anything that, is there any member of the team that we had planned on addressing the audience before I go to the board?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to also clarify, though, and Nick, correct me if I misstate this, but those are two separate parts of DEP. So right now we're dealing with one department of DEP with the notice of intent and wetlands, and the AUL and its boundary is a different department and a separate process.
Department of Waste site cleanup versus wetlands and waterways.
Thank you. That's an important distinction, I think, in terms of the appeal. Okay, with that, as we had discussed, we're going to go to the boards and the committees. Peggy, do you want to recognize anybody from the school committee, and then I will move down to the Board of Selectmen?
Sure. Okay, and then Dr. Quick. Yes, Mr. Hayes and Dr. Quick, like to speak?
First person. Never done this before. I have two questions. One regarding the, I want to pronounce this correctly, adjudication hearing, the process. Who would pay for the appealers' experts? Does that come from their own pockets?
Yes, each party is responsible for paying the cost of its own appeal. As in a judicial proceeding, it is possible to some extent for parties to rely on the testimony of the opposing expert if they can use that to their own advantage. But the party or parties that are bringing the appeal, like a plaintiff in a civil lawsuit in court, have the initial burden of going forward. They have the obligation to present what is at least initially a viable case. And because of the technical nature of the issues, it's incumbent on them to provide the first evidence, testimony, and documents that would tend to support their position. So as a practical matter, initially, they need to retain their own experts. Sometimes parties are clever, are able to enlist others who have their own reasons for participating in appeal. But as a general proposition, they have to incur those expenses.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hi. My first question is regarding, I know the gentleman had mentioned that if we end up going well over the expected schedule, we're looking at about a 5% increase, which could mean about $3 million. Was that amount not including if we end up going to this adjudicatory process, including other fees associated with the possible process of going through legal ramifications, or is that $3 million just the construction piece of it?
That's the construction piece. There are, obviously, you're correct. There are other costs that are associated with that. So yes, there would be some additional costs as well.
And I have two more questions also. My other question is, second question is, on the permitting areas, I know that you're taking out that small parking lot that is along the Wildwood field. How many spaces was that going to hold?
We still have that small parking lot. We changed the surface from regular asphalt to porous.
Oh, but
paving.
it is going to stay a spot for parking.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And then my last question is the site mitigation. I know you mentioned when it's on site, it's a 1-to-1 ratio. When it's off site, it's 1-to-2. Can you expound upon that, please?
Sure. That is straight out of the regulations, the Wetlands Protection Act and its regulations. And my understanding is that if you're doing it on-site, it's immediately mitigates the impact right there. If you're going off-site, it's not at the same location. And then there is, to encourage on-site mitigation, you have a 2-to-1 off-site. It's right out of the regulations, and it's to encourage people to do mitigation on-site. Obviously, we, as John had gone through all of the little things that he talked about, like the warning track and those type of things, that's all part of the mitigation. Because again, that doesn't have topsoil. It goes back to the definition of degraded. So we're following the regulations as it's written. So everything that was done within the riverfront that could be done, i.e. not doing a synthetic turf field, was not included, but everything else, the bus loop, the warning track, anything that was in the riverfront was taken out and used as mitigation. So that's how we get to the 1-to-1 on-site. It's only after we maximize what's within the riverfront did we then look off-site.
Thank you.
We're all set, thank you.
Thank you. Questions or comments from the board?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't have any questions. I'd just like to make a comment. You know, I believe the message was loud and clear that the taxpayers and the community voted overwhelmingly to support a new high school. And the town meeting and the special election proved that, and it created what I would consider a strong mandate. As an elected official for a long time, I may oppose a town meeting, but I accepted the decision and I moved on. And that's what you sometimes need to do. Prior to that, prior to all the votes, some of us sitting up here, including myself, prior to knowing if there was ever going to be a high school, some of us running for re-election put our elections on the line showing support. And a question was asked by reporters, do you support a new school? And I did. And I'm sitting here today. Not only that, I even taught the ticket. The other thing I like to say is I respect people's opinions. You know, people, we agree to disagree. And I believe, you know, due process, people have a right to appeal and people have that certain rights. And after hearing the gentleman stating that it could cost us $3 million plus if these appeals take place, as a business owner in this community for 28 years, and there's two words I hate to use, and I'm sure some folks out there owning a small home would say, you know, sometimes you waste time and you waste money. You know, some things cost time, some things cost money. And I can see that happening with this. And I would hope to think that we could move on it. And I see Mr. Tracy in the audience, and I think he does an outstanding job as principal at the high school. And I hope September of 2014 that I'm there with you, Mr. Tracy, opening the school. I know you're the gatekeeper, but I really like to give the ownership to the kids of this community because they're the real losers that are going to lose on this there if this thing doesn't happen. But I see it happening, and I just hope there's a, you know, with respect to everybody, that there's at least we offer an olive branch to anybody who's deciding to appeal that, you know, I think we should really mediate, work it out. And I want to do it in a positive manner because sometimes you have to give a little to get a little bit, and I've learned that, believe me, in life, all right? But I just want to say that, and I just hope that we can have a meeting of the minds and really move forward and do what's right for the community and what's right for our kids. And hate to spend any money, you know, unnecessarily. I think a lot of us feel like that. And I appreciate the opportunity speaking, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Down that direction? Yes.
First, I'd like to just extend a sincere thank you to each and every one of you that are part of the team for being here. There's quite an extensive group of people here to kind of share with all of us on the various boards and committees and also the residents. So I do appreciate you being here. There's quite a significant amount of information here. A lot of the questions and clarifications that I needed, quite frankly, have been answered. Certainly you have done extensive work on this project, and we certainly are here tonight primarily speaking about a current hurdle that we have before us. It's my understanding that the site visit went extremely well on June 7th. I did get an update on that, and it seems that there was further collaboration and communication with the appellants, and I'm sensing a little bit of need for further clarity, and if I might ask legal counsel at this time, if you have a given appeal with 10 residents and someone were to drop off that appeal, you know, midstream, if you will, can you pick up additional parties to assemble that 10 resident threshold to go to the next level if they're different members, for example?
Sometimes, but rarely, that happens, and when it does, there's a procedure that may be available. If there are multiple parties filing the appeal, then and the 10 residents and not all 10 of the residents proceed with the appeal, they can possibly reconstitute themselves and move to intervene. That is, they would have to ask the hearing officer for permission to participate formally in the proceeding as a party, with some of the members being different than they were initially. And that's a disfavored procedure, but it is a possibility if there are multiple appellants. And if the request or motion is filed early in the process, because at that scheduling conference 1 month into the appeal, the hearing officer establishes deadlines. The object is to keep the process moving, and that means that there will be an opportunity only up to a certain point for additional parties to participate in the appeal. So there would be a deadline for that. That would be probably the only means of reorganizing the 10 resident group.
Okay, just a couple additional questions on that. You talked about the fact that the appellants would have to hire their own experts. Would they be required to retain their own legal counsel in addition to any additional experts that they would need to aid them in the process?
No, but most would, because they would want to, given the expense involved and the commitment, they'd want to present and put their best foot forward and present the strongest case that they can.
An additional question is that we talked about there's various aspects of DEP, and we're talking specifically, from my understanding, that there's an appeal on a notice of intent. So is it possible that some of the appellant's issues would not necessarily be considered under the scope of the NOI and therefore maybe not even deemed worthy of going forward in the appeals process because they're not in that purview?
Right. Well, that's a good question. It's the duty of the hearing officer to structure the issues to be decided during the appeal, and the parties have an opportunity to argue what issues they believe are properly within the scope of the appeal, but they have to be rooted in the superseding order that was issued by the DEP. So it is possible that in that weeding out process, some of the issues would be rejected as outside the scope of the appeal.
Okay. Just like to make a final statement that Mr. McCoy obviously had touched upon the fact that we did have a special town meeting and a town meeting, to be able to, a special election rather, to decide to move forward with this school. And it certainly was conveyed out to the public with a certain dollar amount and a certain timeline. And obviously, based on the nature of this appeal, that is subject to change. I do want to express personally, as a tax-paying resident and also a business owner in the town, that I'm disheartened and disenchanted with the fact that we have received this roadblock that we need to overcome collectively as a town and as a community. Certainly, I would like to keep everything on a positive, tone. We are all here for the benefit of the children and for the faculty and staff, and to see that Wilmington remains to be a quality, great place to live. Certainly, many of us have investments on many different levels, and we're all motivated to see that there's one goal that's achieved in keeping the brightest and best students here in Wilmington, and that they go on to great endeavors. So I have every faith in the team that's assembled here tonight. I'd like to thank you again for being here. I look forward to the DEP response to this, and I'm hoping that we'll come out on the prevailing side and that we'll move forward with minimal disruption to the project timeline. Thank you.
Well said, Ms. O'Donnell. I agree by and large with everything you've just said. I want to also, in addition to thanking the ladies and gentlemen who presented to us tonight, thank you for your hard work and efforts on the town's behalf and on this project's behalf. I also want to thank all the residents that are here tonight. It's Monday night and there are other things to be doing, but you're here and you're passionate about this issue on either side of the issue, and I respect and appreciate that. This has been an issue, and I guess I'm probably preaching to the choir here a little bit, that has impassioned folks. It's an emotional issue. We have been following this process for a couple of years, and when it came to fruition recently, I think folks were exuberant and really excited, and so I think that some of this appeals process has been a difficult pill to swallow for those of us who were very excited when this came, when we won at town election. So I put that out on the table. I think it's worthy of consideration and worthy of being considered, that there are a number of folks who are have been made to feel anxious through this process. I wanted to make sure I heard what I think I heard correctly, if I may, Dan, and that is, if the hearing officer in that preliminary hearing deems the nature of this adjudicate, whatever that one, if he deems it not valid or not viable or not justifiable, he at that point can just say, look, we're not going to move forward with this. You haven't presented me with any new information. We've gone through the appeals process. It's been ruled on. You're just trying to stall, so we're going to move on here unless you have something new. Is that a conceivable response?
Yes. There are at least two opportunities for that. One would be on his own initiative or her own initiative. The hearing officer could, in deciding what the issues are, determine that there are no viable issues. There are no issues that are appropriately within the scope of the appeal. More likely, though, there could be a motion for a summary decision, summary adjudication. Doesn't happen often, but there are cases where one party may convince the hearing officer that there is not a need to present expert testimony on issues because the outcome is clear by applying the law to the issue as presented, so as to short-circuit the process, at least for that one issue. Those are the opportunities to avoid the necessity of a full-blown hearing.
Okay. Yeah, I hate to keep focusing on this adjudicatory hearing issue. However, I hope it doesn't come to even have to come into factor, but I was hopeful that the appeals wouldn't either, and they did. So it's in my mind. I want to be prepared and have an understanding of that process. Unfortunately, or God forbid, it does come to fruition. The AUL, these borings and the results of the findings of where the oil is and the depth and et cetera were reported in such a way that the design was made so that we would minimize the amount of disturbance to that area and construct off the area completely. Am I correct in that?
Yeah. So obviously, as the design team working together and collaborating, we had the information from the report that indicated the depths and so forth. And one thing that we were doing to just confirm this exact thing that you're asking a question on is to look at the AUL and do a very quick section through that and just hit the next, and basically look at, where the contaminated soil is based upon the most recent investigation, which is down in this area here. The gray is the existing building. This is the boiler room, which the slab is going to stay there. And this red line here is the proposed grade. So this is pavement here and some islands and things like that. These red long things, it's an exaggerated scale, but those are drainage structures. So what this is trying to show is, this is a section, a cut through the site to show that all of the new stuff is above that contaminated soil. So we went through the process and made sure that all of our infiltration system, which is part of the drainage stormwater management system, they are outside of the AUL itself. And then the only thing within the AUL are pipes and structures like catch basins and manholes. But even those structures are well above the contaminated area. So the whole idea is to keep everything high enough so that we don't, for very practical cost reasons, that you don't get into, the soils and you don't create a potential health issue with that. So this section here is to demonstrate that, we have thought of that. It's part of our design, and it was very deliberate in what we did here so that we can stay out of that. And that was done through, obviously, the investigation and then that information being used throughout the design team.
And pardon the ignorant question, but I think the assumption is yes. But all of that has been presented and approved by DEP before we went into a design to put a parking lot on top of oil. DEP is not going to say, oh, wait a minute, you have to move the parking lot. So they know and have approved of that that concept, yes?
So we've gone through the notice of intent, which has to do with the Wetlands Protection Act. So that process and all of this information, elevation, inverts, all of that information obtained through the investigation of the most recent one last year of where the soils are and so forth, all of that was part of the record presented and given to them. And I'll going to defer to the LSP in 1 second, is that when you talk about specifically once you do the work and how it relates to the AUL, that is a different division within DEP, and there's a separate process. DEP, through this appeal process, will look at this information. They will already have consulted with their other fellow DEP in the different division on what the process is. And just like the Wilmington Conservation Commission, there will be a condition in there about this, saying that you have to, follow the requirements, and this is a process. And then I will hand it off to the LSPs, just so that I don't get into trouble dealing with something I don't know a whole lot about.
If I may, before you grab the microphone, or you can grab it, but before you chime in, this is non-porous asphalt that's going above this this area, or is this porous?
There is, the majority of it is impervious, non-porous. There is a few small sections as a demonstration areas of porous, but there's nothing, the only thing that's falling into it is what falls on it, just like the landscape islands. So the majority of it is a standard pavement.
Thank you.
Okay, the AUL has a couple of different pieces. It talks to prohibited uses and allowed uses. And it also talks to if you take certain activities such as excavation, what measures you need to take to protect the people that are going to be doing that work. Okay, so I'll talk to the latter first. The AUL says if you do construction activities that extend more than 8 feet below grade, you have to write what they call a soil management plan, which tells the people on the site what to do with the soil. Put it here, put it there, take it off site, put it back. And then a health and safety plan, which is to protect the workers. If you run into X, Y, or Z, get out of the hole and call so-and-so. It also talks about prohibited uses and allowed uses. It's a whole list of allowed uses that includes schools, recreation, office, commercial. There's a list of prohibited uses, which includes basically residential use. And if you go back to the LSP's opinion that wrote the AUL, the concern was to write the AUL that if at some point in the future the town rezones this piece of land to residential, could be 100 years from now, when everyone will forget about it, that we don't cut the grade down 8 feet and build a house on top of contamination. That was the main, and the other was to protect construction workers that would be working in this area. So those are the prohibited uses. Now, there's a condition that says an LSP can always look at a prohibited use and do additional study and determine that, in the language of the regulations, a condition of no significant risk existed for people who live on this, in the AUL area, in which case they would amend the AUL. Okay.
I'm not sure that answered your question. You were wondering, has DEP approved this part of the design?
Yeah, more.
Okay. The answer is no. Under the LSP system, there's a privatized program. There's no requirement for DEP to review anything at this juncture. If we go to terminate or revise the AUL, then the DEP gets involved. But at this point, the answer is no.
Okay, thank you.
But I just to maybe follow up on Ralph, an LSP would look at the proposed use just to ensure that it does conform with the activity and use limitation. If it does, then there's no need to go to DEP or to look to move forward.
I get it.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Yeah, I believe it's all been said here. I appreciate all the updates and the professionalism that's been displayed here tonight, and every update, every time you've come before this board and the school committee. I appreciate all the thoroughness and the professionalism that's been displayed from everybody here. Thank you. That's all I got.
Okay, as we move to the part of the agenda where we respond to any questions or comments that the audience might have. I just want to make sure that that I reinforce for the audience what the purpose of tonight's meeting is. After consultation with the school committee chairperson, Peggy Kane, we had actually invited the appellants this evening for the express purpose of making sure we understand the substance of their appeals in the hopes of using this forum as another opportunity to come to a meeting of the minds and to short-circuit this appeal that has been outlined for us this evening. There has been some discussion about different groups within the group of appellants, and with referring to the appeal that requires 10 residents. In this particular case, there were 13. If I'm incorrect, let me know. Clearly, just based on the submittal, a group of those residents who are also representatives of the stream team and who had provided a memorandum which was included in the appeals paperwork, clearly they are on the same page as the town in terms of the project that's on the table and that's been presented. That group of residents, and specifically I'm referring to Ms. Sullivan and Mrs. Stevenson, had indicated to the manager that they had other commitments this evening. Happens to be the work group, which is a community organization that works with EPA in reviewing the remediation activities at the Olin Chemical Corporation. Frankly, the town does not receive notice of those meetings, so neither Mrs. Kane nor myself were privy to the fact that there was a meeting. But nonetheless, those folks specifically conveyed to the town manager that they appreciated the invitation this evening. As I understand it, had a very productive conversation with our team and with the manager himself at and immediately following the site walk. And I think, as has been described this evening, that group of residents, subject only to being clear on how certain conditions are written and what specific notations and depictions are shown on plans, is substantively on board with the 3 selected sites for off-site mitigation and in substance on board with the project that's on the table. So I'm not at all bashful about telling this audience and the general public one very specific reason for inviting those folks was in the hopes that this forum will short-circuit this appeals process. To that end, I would again ask, as I recognize a lot of faces in here, I've been at a lot of these meetings, and please don't be offended when I again ask folks to be respectful. We want candid comment. We want to hear your opinions and your questions, but be mindful of the fact that the appellants are here, and certain members of the appellant group are here. We want to try and convince them that their questions have been answered. And I specifically invite any of those folks who are still here. I noticed the spokesperson for the group was here earlier and I believe has left. Certainly, if you have questions or comments, we want to hear them because we want to be able to answer them and move on and save the town big money and big delays. With all of that said, the ground rules, if there are questions or comments, I would ask folks to either stand and, where you're seated, state your name and address, speak loudly enough so we can hear you. If we can't hear you, I will ask you to take the microphone. I'd ask that all questions and comments be directed through the chair. I'd ask that you be mindful of everybody's time and try not to, be abusive of people's time, and try and be succinct. And lastly, I'd ask that your questions and comments not rehash the history of the last 2 years of the development of this project, but to be directly related to the information that's been presented tonight, and that is the design development that's occurred recently and has been depicted this evening, and questions about the appeals process.
They're asking you to go through the mic.
Okay, we amend the ground rules to please take the microphone. With all of that said, do we have any questions or comments at this time? Yes, Mr. Bodnar.
Thank you, Michael. Mr. Linkenfelder put this appeal through, and he enticed me. And I don't mean enticed me as far as, hey, you want to sign it to stop this school project. I personally was against the school project from the get-go. Everyone here knows it. At the present time, the masses have decided that we need and want a school. So I will half-heartedly support it. But now, as far as this appeal that George put together, and I was all for, he brought out to me the concern about the oil at the former boiler room spills, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And he also mentioned to me that the general contractors and some of this site remediation, or whatever you want to call it, he had mentioned to me that they were going to leave the current boiler room, and as far as the excavation of the site, anything after 8 feet wasn't going to be touched, and the likes. Well, it was quite confusing. I personally signed this appeal because at some future date, this oil, it could be in 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years, and we're having a 30-year-old high school with residual problems from a 1952 high school. And that was one of the main issues. I did not want to stop this project. It will go through. I was concerned with the remediation that's going to be. I don't think it was thorough. I mean, I'm not going to question the DEP or the likes, but George brought up a lot of issues to me, and I said, well, George, go for it. I'm sad to say that he's not here at the present time. And he could answer these questions better than I am here. But I believe I'd like to present to everyone, including the people here, more needs to be studied about the future parking lot site and the drainage and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I guess that's why I'm here.
Well, Mr. Bodnar, first of all, thank you for offering those comments. But in response to that, the town has invested a great deal of time, a great deal of resources in engaging licensed site professionals and a design team who have, to a fare thee well, reviewed the site conditions relative to drainage and relative to the AUL. What I'm, given your comments, what I'm hoping we can accomplish tonight is to draw the distinction between concerns about the AUL and concerns about the wetlands. The appeal that you have joined as a signatory seeks to undo the order of conditions, or to reform the order of conditions, or to change the order of conditions that's been issued by the Conservation Commission. But we've got people and folks who have been involved in numerous projects of this magnitude, who've been involved in a number of public and private projects that, you know, none of these issues are novel to them. And they're explaining to us that the issues with the AUL will be addressed separate and apart from this appeals process. So if you can just take that leap of faith, can't you see your way clear to saying, okay, I will entrust the town and I will entrust the professionals that they hire to fully, fairly, and thoroughly review all of the issues pertaining to the AUL, notwithstanding your initial concerns. And particularly will you do that in the context of delaying a project upwards of a year and to the tune of possibly $3 million. That's what we're hoping to get from you.
Mr. Newhouse, I apologize for I'm not attempting to throw this whole schedule out of kilter. I saw the chart up there where we should be, where we, whatever. This wasn't the goal of this appeal. The goal of this appeal was to question the oil and the remediation and everything else. If this board and the people in this audience tonight feel confident that everything has been done above board, thorough, including our DEP experts and the likes, I cannot speak for George, but if tonight the masses believe that there'll be no future problems with this site, our former high school site or our present high school site, then I can only say continue, but I can't speak for George. He has facts, data, etc. And that's where I said, I did not anticipate putting this project out of kilter. I supported George's appeal, I should say, only because I have a great concern about what is going to be done. I mean, in our eagerness to build this school, that's the whole issue. We have been eager. Everyone on the Board of Selectmen and the school committee members, we have to get this school. Now that we've got the okay overwhelmingly by the whole town, it's hurry up and get the project done. I understand what you said, Michael, about other contractors, schedules, et cetera, but something may happen up the road. Can we just have a little patience and let someone look at this, review it one last time? That's all I'm saying.
I would suggest that this team of folks has, again, looked at it one last time in preparation for this evening, and I would also indicate to you that not only does the town have every confidence in the people that we are responsible for overseeing and making sure they know their business, but so is the stream team at this point. So I think that point needs to be made, and I'm not going to badge you. I will just I will acknowledge that I don't expect you to speak for any other appellant, but I'm hearing you say that you didn't appreciate the impacts that this appeal might have. Fair enough. Nobody's going after you or anybody else, but those costs are real, and those delays are real.
My concern deals with the issue up the street with the oil and the construction. As far as putting the project out of kilter, that was not my. I concede. I think I dealt with Mr. Hayden here after the election and approval. I said, Dick, you guys won fair and square. And
so how come we're still fighting?
All right, I don't want to interrupt you, Mr. Blotner. I think we're both set up. Peace. Do you have anything further?
I've explained my personal feelings on this issue, and I wish George were here he could go on with the facts and data. At the present time, I don't have them. And I thank you for the opportunity, and it was not my issue to stop, premise to stop this. I just figure if we can give a little more time and study this deeper, we may save ourselves some future expenses.
If I might, can I just add, I was just going to add one piece, if I might.
Please.
You might argue as the owner's project manager that we are eager to move the project forward. That is what we do. That being said, we have not one but two LSPs on this project. And in fact, early on in the project, we consulted with a third LSP, somebody that we had worked with before, that was not as part of this team, but somebody we have a long-standing relationship with, and asked them similar questions about what our obligations under the AUL are. And we in effect, have similar responses from 3 LSPs. So I think we feel confident. And if we didn't, we wouldn't move forward. As eager as we are, and as our desire to move the schedule and save money, I don't believe anyone on this team would want to move forward if we felt we were at risk. And that is the other, in addition to looking at money and looking at time, we look at risk. And if there was a sense, I think, on anybody's part here that we were at risk, even if it was a little bit, I think we would take a step back, as you are suggesting, and say, we really feel there is risk here. And we've done that assessment, and we've talked with everybody on the team, the LSPs, the environmental people who we have working on this project, and others, and feel confident in moving forward.
Thank you. And I heard I will give you another opportunity after other folks have spoken, Mr. Bodnar. I sent somebody down here with a question, but I thought the chairperson also had a question.
Mr. Bodnar, I just wanted to reassure you. You had said that if we could say tonight that we feel that there are strong reasons to go forward, and we're fine. I just want you to think about looking at this board right up here. Every one of us has somebody who will eventually benefit from the school. We have either grandchildren or children or nieces or nephews or brothers or sisters. And believe me, none of us ever would be putting our children into our grandchildren, nieces, nephews, brothers, sisters. We wouldn't be putting them into this school if there was even the slightest question that there was a problem. We've been assured, this has gone on for years, and we have been assured that this is well taken care of, that there are basic accommodations being made so that there can never be an issue with it. And I just want to assure you, yes, we're eager. We're eager because the time is right, and the town came together and said the time is right. And we want to do what is right for our children, and I know you do, and I understand what you're saying, but a lot of times we make decisions based on one fact, and we don't see the consequences of it. And so I admire you. I thank you for admitting that you didn't see the consequences of this. And I hope that you'll unsign from that petition. Thank you.
Yeah, you know what, my comment is very brief. The spokesperson for this appeal is George Lingenfelter. George Lingenfelter isn't here. That's all I have to say.
I'm going to give Mr. Bodnar, I'm going to give the opportunity of two other folks to speak who haven't spoken yet. I will make it a point to recognize you again if you wish to be recognized at a later point. Mr. Sagal?
My last comment.
Mr. Bodnar, I don't want to be rude, but other people deserve an opportunity to speak. I'm telling you, I will give you another opportunity to speak if you so wish. Thank you. Mr. Sagal?
Carl Sagal, 7 Lawrence Court. I am not one of the appellants, but I did hear a number of things here, and I have been somewhat active on this. I believe the original vote was something in the neighborhood of 1,400 and change to 30-something. I was one of the 30-something. I'm proud of having been one of the 30-something for the reasons that I voted the way I did. However, the town is moving in this direction. I believe that there needs to be appropriate oversight on the project. I know that there are professionals that are hired by the town to oversight. I know that there was an appeal made to the state to check up on the paperwork, the phraseology on some of the things that were listed, and to answer some of the questions. And I know there was a site visit. I don't know the results of that site visit. But I think that for my perspective, having children in the school system that will take advantage of this school, My understanding is that the concern isn't necessarily for the safety of the building itself or the students in it, but that water from this site will leach elsewhere when the construction is done. All that having been stated, I'm confident the fact that the DEP is reviewing what these professionals have already assessed, and I'm hoping, truly hoping, as a citizen of Wilmington, that DEP finds that there are maybe some administrative corrections to the order of conditions that need to be made, but that the project is sound and moves forward. I understand it's what the town has voted and the town wants. My objections were much more administrative than they were on the project itself. The town has established very clearly that it wants the project. Since we're going to do the project and it's either going to cost this amount or that amount, I implore everyone to get on board with the project, make sure the oversights are in place, and let's move forward with it. So my position is proud that I voted the way I did, but recognizing where we are and where we're going, and I say let's go there. And I think that the town has a lot of people that haven't been very active or loud about this, that maybe were on the fence or whatever, but the fence sitting is over and it's time to move on. Whether there are appeals or not, we're moving in this direction. So, like I said, my sincere hope is that the DEP finds that the project is completely sound. There are some administrative details to be worked out, that they can be done. My understanding is that this AOL will not be disturbed in the first phase, so I don't see any reason to stop the first phase and get moving with it. That's my position. I have no questions. Just wanted to make that statement. And I believe I'm not alone in my trepidation as to whether or not there are people that have an interest in this, that might be wanting to whitewash something or blindly look the other way. And I think there are enough professionals involved, and now the DEP is involved. I sincerely hope that everything is resolved in this first round and we move forward without any further delay.
Yes, Mr. McDonald.
Kevin McDonald, 140 Andover Street, Wilmington. I have several questions and I have some comments. I thought it might benefit us in time if I could just ask a question to the licensed site professional and then go on to another question in case he needs to look up in his notes as to what the answer would be.
Ms. McDonald, if you could, direct the questions through us, and if the questions are in order, we certainly will refer them to the correct professional.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, could you have the licensed site professional tell us what the percolation rate of the soil is above the AUL area, or in the AUL area above the oil spill? If he needs to look up in his notes, I could go on to another question for the sake of time.
Why don't you hold on, and I'll refer to the LSPs and ask the, first of all, do you have the information available? And secondly, do you want to speak to it? Okay. Okay, at that, Ms. McDonald, certainly, what's your next question?
Okay. There have been some information given tonight regarding timelines, regarding hypothetical cost escalations, and I believe our project manager mentioned about possibly starting this project if there was no appeals after school was out. So my question is, if the project was going to start, can you tell us what financial institution is providing the funding for the town's financial portion of the project?
Ms. McDonald, that has nothing to do with the presentation this evening. You've asked that question upteen times in various meetings. I'm going to rule that one out of order. Do you have a...
Mr. Chairman, the reason for the question is I never got an answer on that.
I believe you have, so we'll move to the next question for the purposes of this evening, please. Thank you.
Could you tell us what the square footage of the area of the AUL is?
Again, that should be directed to our LSPs. Do you need time to pull out the notes on that, gentlemen?
Okay.
If you could hold on a moment, I'm just looking for confirmation from these gentlemen. We'll give you a couple minutes. Okay, Ms. McDonald, next question.
Okay. Also, I would like to know what the depth of the sewer line is servicing the high school, and if it's going to be a pressure line, a pumped up system. And also, we were told that the residents along Church Street are going to be prohibited from hooking into that sewer line. I would like that information answered and confirmation on that last point.
Okay, let me take that two-part question and answer it in two parts. As to the depth of the sewer line, as folks had indicated earlier, that work, while being a necessary component to getting this project done, is not in the purview of these folks right here. It's not part of that contract. I know that this question has been asked previously. I don't remember referring you myself to the superintendent of water and sewer, but I certainly would do that now in terms of telling you to see the water and sewer superintendent, Mike Woods, relative to depths of sewer lines that would be servicing this site. As to the second part of your question, the town of Wilmington, in its ability to provide or allow sewer connections for residents, is constrained by the Comprehensive Water Resources Management Plan. That CWRMP is the result of years of effort and, give or take, a $500,000 investment of the taxpayers and ratepayers of Wilmington. From my own standpoint, there are components to the CWRMP that I'm not particularly crazy about. I think that it's probably more restrictive than we really needed to be to accomplish water conservation measures that are the goal of the town. But that CWRMP was a project that built a consensus amongst the Board of Selectmen, the Water and Sewer Commissioners, the Town Administration, and the Department of Environmental Protection, and that was done several years ago. So while I wouldn't debate the effect that it may have on any particular resident, I'd have to refer to the plan that's at least that thick to be able to comment on which tier of approval a property owner might require in order to connect to sewer. But I can tell you that it's beyond the control of this team and this body of elected officials up here.
Okay, the reason I brought that up is because I thought I saw one of the local septic system installers installing a new septic system for somebody along Church Street. And the reason I bring that up also is we were told because our wells were shut down in that section of town that the chemical NDMA, which is known for causing cancer, because the wells are not pumping that water, the water is rising, and that chemical compound, that carcinogen, is actually spreading into other areas. So if it's spreading into other areas because of the lack of water being pumped, it's my belief that if the people on Church Street could hook into a sewer line and keep excessive water from actually contributing to that happening, that it might be in the best interest of the community for the Board of Selectmen, the Water Sewer Commissioners, and anyone else involved for that matter, to actually appeal to the state or whatever agency is involved with the Comprehensive Water Management Resources Plan.
And I didn't want to interrupt you, but beyond the complex nature of the Owen site, beyond the extremely detailed and complex nature of the CWRMP, that horse has left the barn. It's not up for debate as part of this project, and I would refer you to the Water and Sewer Superintendent for a very detailed explanation concerning some of the questions you have. I would also refer you to the community meetings that occur as part of the PIP process for the Olin site, which I've seen you at. I know that you've attended at least one or a couple of them, so I'd encourage you to attend those meetings on that issue.
Okay, I would also like to bring up that earlier in the meeting, there was a gentleman from the state of Massachusetts. He's actually the Senior Regional Director for the Office of Business Development. And one of the things that I noticed that he stated was that banks do not lend on brownfield sites. And
excuse me, I'm not sure that's what he said. I think what he said was, in the context of a discussion that really has no direct bearing on this meeting and what everybody is here for at this hour, what he said was that by going through that process, should the town decide to avail itself of that process, certain financing mechanisms will be made available to the owner. He did not make any indication as to whether or not banks lend to brownfields.
He may have misspoken. He may have misspoken.
Well, he may have misspoken, or you may have misunderstood him, but either way, I'd like you to move to the next question.
I'll give you that. We'll
please.
check the tape, okay, but I'm pretty confident what I heard.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, the reason why I even brought that up is because if it was an issue with financing, I just wanted the question answered. Who's financing the town's portion of the project? It seems like a simple answer, but you don't want to answer that.
No, it's that I want to answer it. I think it was Albert Einstein who said that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. I've come to accept that the definition of mixanity is asking the same question over and over again, expecting a different answer. Please move on to your next question.
Just to clarify something, I thought at the beginning of the meeting we were going to treat people with respect. Why don't we just move on to some of the other questions? Since there are some logistical issues with the school being built and then being occupied before the building is knocked down, there are issues such as if the parking area is going to get built where the school exists, and that area is also where the bus comes in, it seems like that could be an issue with the parking and that sort of thing, and drainage. The other issue was
before we go on, I think that the presentation was clear in terms of the bus turnaround. Is there any comment from our design team relative to how that is integrated into the site?
Yes, we did show the phasing diagrams, and there is a change in sequence. Obviously, we need to take down the building to put the new parking up. That's the parking and the car drop-off loop. The bus loop is on the west side of the new school and will be accessible from day one. Student parking and staff parking during construction will be mostly on Middlesex across the street.
And at a previous meeting, I had asked the architect if you could tell us just the building portion of the project, just the school building that's going to get built, what the actual cost of that was. Did you get that number for us?
I don't have that number at the time. I think I said that we do have the cost estimate, which is available as a public document if you want to do a breakdown.
Okay.
It's not broken down that way.
Okay. In addition, I just want, in case anybody is not aware of this, I was the individual that was going out there every day when they were doing the test drilling. And there is if you could bring up on your screen the overview of the AUL area that shows the test borings. Someone could do that?
Whoever's sure, if you could bring up the picture of the AUL.
Okay. There's an area there that has test borings. And that area happens to be an area in behind the school between the cafeteria that is a paved area. The interesting thing about that area is that we were told that there was a remediation done there, which means the oil supposedly was cleaned up. And we have pictures showing trucks pumping water out, excavations of that area. However, when I went down there, I had a laboratory collection vial. And
Mr. McDonald, not going to go there. Does any member of the team want to speak to the existence or non-existence of any materials? I know it's been asked and answered. I'll pose on you again.
Nick Lanny, who was our geotechnical engineer as well, and was directing the boring there.
We were doing test borings in the AUL area. When you do a test boring, you drive a piece of hollowed steel pipe in the ground. The pipe gets filled up with the soil. You then have to wash it out with water under pressure. Mr. McDonald saw, as we were washing out soil in the casing, the water, because under pressure, comes gushing up a couple of feet out of the casing and into a mud tub. The boring he's talking about is in the pink area. There's soil in that area that has oil in it. When we encounter that soil with oil, it gets disturbed and stirred up. And so what comes out is soil with a little bit of oil. It's not gushing. You would expect to find it there because you know, based on all our investigations, that there's oil in soil down. I think the boring's at 14 feet down. So the fact that it occurred was expected. It's consistent with all the data, all the previous data.
Ms. McDonald, if I could ask you, I just want to make sure that others have an opportunity to speak if they so wish. Do you know how many more questions you have or how many more comments you have? Just a few more?
I had to make this statement again now, that's not one of the oil issues. I didn't get the percolation rate, but it's my belief that, I think it was in junior high that I learned this, that oil actually floats on water. We were told that the parking lot is going to be a permeable parking lot where water turns into it. It's my belief that with large amounts of water, rainfall and other drains being allowed to infiltrate and percolate into the soils, that eventually that oil could possibly work its way up. Thank you.
We'll start all over again.
I'd be glad to, Mr. Semaglia, but I would suggest that you probably wouldn't want to answer my questions anyway. With regard to oil, we know that there are additives that are put in with oil. We don't know what those additives are. We are concerned that the water that's going to be put into this area is going to be mixing with additives, possibly going into groundwater. We are familiar with the fact that there's a wetlands in close proximity to this area, and we hear our owner's project manager saying that costs could go up. And I would suggest that, you know, if Olin thought that their cost for their contaminated site was only going to be $3 million, they would have did some before that happened. So some of us are trying to do things so that that $3 million doesn't turn into $10 or $20 million in lawsuits, in contamination claims, and that sort of thing.
Okay, if we could, and I'm really trying hard not to interrupt you.
Yeah, right.
You made a misstatement at the beginning of that comment relative to the paving being permeable or pervious. I'm not sure which word you used, but I'm going to, excuse me, now it's my turn. I'm going to refer to the LSPs to make comment on that and to correct anything else that you picked up on in that comment.
I'll try to answer his first two questions. We have not done a percolation test on the site. But I would say, having done numerous percolation tests, it's probably, in that kind of soil, it's probably 5 minutes an inch or less. Infiltration rate, which is another measure, is probably 2 inches per hour. Basically, they're measures of how fast water moves through soil. Okay. The area of the AUL is about 73,000 square feet.
I'm sorry, how many square feet?
73,000 square feet.
That's the total
Total area of the AUL.
Right.
The blue dashed line on the plan.
Furthermore, there's been some mischaracterization about the pervious pavement. There are a few parking spaces where, for purposes of lead, high-efficiency vehicles will be located. Yeah, if you want to go to the overall site plan. Or even that right here, that's good. They're actually in dark gray. So there's one set here, preferred parking close to the building, and then two sets there. The pervious parking there serves to designate those visually and tactilely as special parking, only for designated vehicles. But and Sandy, you can speak to this more, but between the landscaping and this amount of pervious there, it's roughly similar to the amount of pervious in the existing condition. After all, the entire courtyard of the existing school is not impervious and is in fact substantially pervious. So there is infiltration occurring right now in the AUL area.
Okay. Now, just the last question, Mr. Lewis?
Last question. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Since the construction was going to begin, I would imagine that there's been a contractor that was contracted with to do the site work and the demolition. Can you just identify that contractor?
We can't, because of the appeal, we can't award any contracts.
So before the appeal happened, there was no bids put out for the contracting work?
I didn't say that. What I said was that there have been no contracts awarded, nor will they be while the appeal is pending.
Okay, let me clarify that. I'm not looking for the awarded name of the contractor. I was wondering who the low bidder was.
We did an early release package on a few things in anticipation of not having an appeal, and the early release package was on the site construction as well as the field, the synthetic turf. We've made no decisions, no awards. They're all being evaluated. I can tell you the shame of it is that if we end up going to an appeal, we're going to lose what I believe, from looking at these submissions, a very good price that is within our budgeted estimate. But we're certainly not going to be talking about any award because we haven't made one yet, and they're still doing due diligence right now.
Now, with regard to that contractor, with the CM process, does it have to go to the central register and come in at a low bid, or with the CM risk system that's in place, could you hire your own guy that you feel comfortable with?
I'm going to ask our team to respond to that question, and in all candor, the question that has been answered at high school building committee meetings. But I'm going to allow it and ask that the question be answered. I will respectfully point out that if the question is asked again at a future meeting, I'm going to remind you of this. Okay, thank you.
Hopefully I can shed some light on that. Currently, we have 3 bid packages out. Early release package number 1, number 2, and number 3. Early release package number 1 consisted of the football field. So within that, we went out to 2 sets of bid packages, one for synthetic turf and one for a site contractor. Both of those work activities don't fall within the state of Massachusetts filed sub-bid law. So those are something that we don't need to go to central registry for. We can farm out, we can request, we can ask, send out requests for proposals. For the turf bidders, we went to 5 vendors. We got 4 prices. And to Michael Kyra's point, we haven't awarded that yet. We've sorted out, and we've continued to have scope reviews to ferret that out. For the site bidders, we went to 8 bidders. We got 5 numbers, and we've had some scope reviews with them as well. But we have not awarded that. For the, so that would be for early release package number 1, football field. For early release package number 2, that is the demolition of the existing gymnasium. So again, that is an activity that does not fall in the Commonwealth of Mass filed sub-bid law. So we requested proposals from a number of companies. We went to 6. We got 4 prices. So we've started conducting scope reviews, but again, we're not in a position where we can award that at the moment.
So just so that we can all understand this, filed sub-bid would go to the central register. That would be a competitive bid project, possibly with 100 companies. And so when we hear that the project could get inflated by $3 million, and you don't have to put it out to the central register, there's the possibility that exists that maybe 90 other companies could come in cheaper than that. So could you tell us, although you're not constrained to put it to the central register, do you have the ability to put it to the central register, get prices from the lowest bidders, take a look at your bidders that were sent requests for proposal, match them up and see how that was without having to go with the filed sub-bidder, competitive bid price?
I'll field that?
Yes, please.
Okay. Mr. Lesser indicated earlier about the project risk. In the central register, or more the filed sub-bids, there is still a qualification process involved with that. So there's a request sent out for bidders, and then there's a grading process, again, by law. And that, even though we could go out to 100 bidders, it's going to sort out those qualified bidders that can bid on the project in a filed sub-bid atmosphere. So similarly, in a non-filed sub-bid atmosphere, we do the same. We do a scorecard, and we do an investigation of who passes financially with their safety record, references from past projects. So that risk side of it, while we could go out to 100 bidders, we've narrowed the pool down to those that, for the benefit of the town, pass our muster. We do a Dun & Bradstreet on them. We check their OSHA records for the past 5 years. We look at references so that we can narrow the pool down. Now, I know it's not 100, but it's still more than the 3 that were required by law. And we're narrowing it down to the qualified bidders for the project.
Good.
Ms. McDonald, please, go ahead, Stuart.
Even for the file sub-bidders, now called trade contractors under the construction management part of Chapter 149A, as Mike said, those contractors have to be pre-qualified. And you'll see, and as we go forward with those trade contractors, whether we're talking about mechanical, electrical, plumbing, we will see 6 or 7, 5, 6, 7 bidders. We're not going to see 100 bidders pre-qualified in any of those trades who can do work at this scale. So even though those will be advertised in the central register, even though it will be public, they will be pre-qualified, and it will be won't be 100 bidders. There won't be 20 bidders in any of those in any of those trades.
Well, it's my opinion, being familiar.
Mr. McDonald, I'm going to ask you to take a break, give anybody else an opportunity to speak. If you have further questions, you had indicated there was one more question, so I relied on that.
I got several other ones.
If you could, just have a seat and let me open it up to other folks who have been sitting here a long time. Thank you. Yes.
Diane Garrity, 6 Boyle Street. I just want to say thank you all for giving me the information tonight. I know I've been keeping up on this, reading back and forth in the paper, and I appreciate everybody's opinion, but just to let you know, not everybody's going to agree on everything. And I think back, I've been here 20 years, and I think back to Market Basket, clearing the trees, Sonic, with the traffic, what's going to happen. And you know what? We dealt with it. We overcame it. I'm here as a concerned parent. My son is a freshman, so he would technically be the first graduating class of this new high school. That's why I'm here. You talk about what is the urgency in this? I can tell you I sit on the high school council meetings with Mr. Tracy, and I see the potential and all that my son could aspire to, I guess, in terms of this new building, and the fact that these people here are standing in his way, standing in the way of progress of all these other kids, his 250 classmates, being able to realize that. That's why I'm here, hoping to persuade some of these people I feel like the due diligence has been done. We've kind of gone rehashing. You know, I believe in the people that we've entrusted here, both in the town and in the DEP, and so I'm just asking those people who are maybe not for it to give thought to those 250 students and what this means to them by keeping the progress on track. So, thank you.
Waterhouse, Shawshene Avenue. I'm here. I faithfully watch the Selectmen's meeting, but don't usually come out to participate. I felt obligated to say today that our town is well managed, and they would not hire anything but a very strong firm to take care of us. And I've dealt personally with these people, and I think we need to appreciate and go forward and keep the ball rolling for our children, our grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Mr. Bodnar, I'd indicated I'd afford you the opportunity to speak again. Don't feel compelled, but if you so desire.
What can I say? Again, and to you, Ms. Kane, I'm not apologizing for putting my signature and supporting this appeal. I hope I convinced you people that I am concerned about the oil. And as far as the specialist here and the remediation areas between the Wildwood Street School, the town park, and the pumping station, there used to be a saying around town, the old farmers, of which I knew a few of them, the remediation areas, and I know the farmers would have said it, and I'm going to say it, it won't amount to a hill of beans, the remediation. The experts have proven that this is the way to go, but they're on different stream beds, et cetera, et cetera. If we feel confident that we can build the school on this site, and are there any, one question I'd like to ask someone, whether it be from the design or building team, are there any contingency plans if we spring an oil leak, and that's the only way I refer to it? I mean, just if we're excavating in the site of the old school or in the back parking lot there, and oh my God, something black comes up. I mean, is it going to cost us, the town, the taxpayers?
I'll, if I could, begin the discussion this way. I'm not an LSP. I know that there is a contingency plan in place, and it's called the Massachusetts Contingency Plan. And I would ask the LSPs to back me up on that. Please do.
In addition to studying the AUL area, we did test borings for the new school. And including that was collecting and testing soil samples for oil, PCBs, and metals. And we didn't find anything. So we actually did some environmental work where the school's going to go to make sure that we weren't going to have oil come gushing out of the ground when we were doing our work. So I just want to make sure that they realize that we investigated more than just the AUL area for environmental issues.
Thank you. I think that was helpful.
Yeah,
Are there any other questions? Oh, did I interrupt you? All set.
Just one clarification.
Yes, Sandra.
There's no remediation work done off-site. It's restoration that's specifically required by the Wetlands Protection Act and its regulations. So it's very specific to deal with riverfront. And what's being restored is taking pavement out and putting in vegetation. There is no remediation work off-site. It's restoration work that's required by the regulations.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken who wishes to ask a question or make a comment? Yes, Mr. De Palma.
Gary De Palma, Swain Road. I just wanted to come up to keep him off here. No, I'm only kidding. If this continues on in litigation, does the town have any type of estimate on what it's going to cost in the legal end of it? We've heard the $3 million plus, but what about the legal end of it, the litigation for this?
I would, on the construction, you've heard the numbers. With
Yes.
respect to our legal bills, we actually have a fixed fee arrangement with town council. So strictly in terms of attorney's fees, really there's no cost there that's appreciable or quantitative. In terms of the experts, we'd really have to take a look at that.
That's what I'm concerned with, is all the experts you're going to have to bring in.
Yeah, and there absolutely is a cost. I can't quantify that for you tonight.
Thank you.
Is there anybody who hasn't spoken who would like to make a comment or ask a question? Yes.
Just to add to that with the question about the experts, is there anything, and I direct this through the chair possibly to Mr. Kara, in terms of the borrowing, interest rates, we had planned on doing a borrowing at a certain time frame. Does that impact locking into a rate over a period of time? As we know, economic conditions, rates are starting to increase in the residential end. I'm assuming on the commercial end that might be the case, maybe not. Could you speak to that?
We did a rather extensive conference call meeting with Standard & Poor's on Friday. It's like a thesis where they ask all kinds of questions about the town and the town's finances. We spoke with them for about an hour and a half. It's my understanding that we should have a rate, a bond rating, hopefully reaffirmed on Thursday of this week, and that maybe by Friday we'll be able to give you an answer to that question as to how it affects it. There is something called arbitrage, which has to do with how long a municipality or an entity can borrow. I mean, you're not supposed to borrow just to make money, so we need to be careful of that, and that's something that we've looked at. So if this extends out a year, we could have some issues there. Hopefully it won't.
Thank you.
Were there any other questions from up front? Comments?
I just wanted to point out one thing. I won't get involved in this whole debate, but the questions regarding the CM at Risk program, which both Mike and Stuart spoke to, the questions that were asked about file sub-bids and all the rest. You should also know that because we entered into that agreement, we received a percentage point on our eligible cost from the MSBA. So because we did that, the town was able to get about $700,000. So, I mean, all in all, the route that we've taken not only assures us that we're going to get the best contractor for the best price, we also got a little premium as a result of doing that in the amount of about $700,000.
Okay. Anybody else who hasn't spoken that wants to make a comment or ask a question?
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
Briefly, maybe I'm going to ask you to repeat yourself, and I'm sorry if I do. Are questions or comments that are being made tonight by the speaker that's at the microphone or anybody else, they're supposed to be relegated exclusively to the appeal process and not to the overall project. Am I right about that?
Yeah, let me answer your question in two parts. First of all, if it speaks to the design presentation that's been presented tonight, we want to entertain those questions and comments, and certainly entertain questions or comments relative to the appeal process and the substance of the appeal. Presuming that nobody else that hasn't spoken has any questions, I'm going to, before I recognize the previous speaker and give him another opportunity to continue his questions, I'm going to thank the audience for being here this evening, for taking the time, thank our professional team, and for better or for worse, I indicated that the gentleman would have another chance to speak. Before we do that, I also have one question of Mr. Bodner, whose train of thought got interrupted. I've heard you make a lot of statements tonight relative to your intentions, and I take them at face value. I'd like to know that if DEP issues a superseding order which approves this project, are you committed not to signing on to a further appeal?
What you're saying is DEP signed an order overriding my appeal?
No. Right. If DEP issues a superseding order by the end of June, which in sum and substance reaffirms the Conservation Commission, are you committed not to further appealing that decision?
God. decisions.
Take it under advisement.
Okay. Well, I think, yeah.
I mean, do we have to know tonight before a whole?
So sure was hoping to hear it tonight.
Look, Michael, George proposed this appeal. He hit me up with it.
All right,
I'm
folks,
left
please don't
here.
interrupt.
I can't
Please
be
don't
the
interrupt.
deciding factor tonight. This is very important to the whole town. I understand you want the project to go through. I'm looking like the ogre. I'm looking like the bad guy. I don't want to be. I'm very proud of my town. But I know what you just said. The DEP issued a... I can't be the deciding factor. I mean, this was George's article.
Yeah, and I, just to be clear, I wasn't asking you to speak for anybody else. I was asking you to speak for yourself.
Well,
okay.
No, I am going to stand. I'm not the bad guy, guys.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you again. I am going to recognize the previous speaker to follow up with just a couple of questions. Ask you to bear with us for a couple moments. Thank you to whomever decides to leave at this point. Ms. McDonald, I think we've been more than fair, and people have been very patient. I'd ask you to be mindful of the hour and fire away.
Well, first of all, I just want to address Mr. Shampoo's comment about Mr. Lingenfelter not being here. And I just want everybody at home to know this, and everybody who may have come in after Mr. Lingenfelter left, that Mr. Lingenfelter was in fact here. He did have a young son. If the meeting had been set up where we could have asked the questions earlier, I think Mr. Lingenfelter may have stayed and asked his questions. Now,
I won't speculate as to that. Do you have any other questions or comments?
Yes. With regard to the football field and the baseball field, at town meeting, we were told that the backstop was going to be moved in. However, we were not told that the infield was going to be moved out 15 feet. So now we're being told something that we weren't told before. And I would question, is that baseball field a regulation baseball field now with the infield moved 15 feet out?
The answer is yes.
It is yes.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Okay. The football field. I did some quick calculations. I've seen some other fields. I have several questions.
If you could direct your questions this way, I ask you to be mindful of the hour. How many more do you have? I thought there was one more few questions.
Probably 3 or 4.
Well, there's
three questions. Is that okay?
Tell you what, why don't we give you one more question and we'll do the best we can to answer it.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to inform everybody of the town, you know.
With regard to respectfully, we've been informing the town at a whole series of public meetings and public forums at which you've been present, Mr. McDonald, and these questions have been asked and answered repeatedly. And there is such a thing as abusing the time of others when it comes to asking repeated questions.
Well, with regard to that statement, Mr. Newhouse, why don't you just ask anybody here if they could provide the name for the institution that's financing the town's portion of the project? I don't think anybody can.
What's that? Tell you what.
Is there financing in place?
Mr. McDonald, excuse me, folks. We'll treat that as your last question, Mr. McDonald. Mr. Carr, if you'd like to speak to that again, be my guest.
Right. The question that you've asked in the past is who does the town use as a financial advisor?
No, that's not what I'm asking.
Let me finish. And the town uses as a financial advisor Eastern Bank. I just told everybody here that we're going to go out to the bond market, so how would I know, and how would anybody know, unless they're Nostradamus, who's going to come up with the money to finance the project? The town has borrowed, has had the authorization to borrow the money, and so now they're going out to the bond market, and that's what I just explained to the residents who happen to have been listening. So
clarification.
I appreciate the question.
If you don't mind.
But on June 25th, at the Selectmen's meeting, we will be making a presentation with the treasurer, and they will be asking the Board of Selectmen to approve the bond authorization. And so at that point, you're going to know exactly who we're dealing with.
Okay, so in other words, if school was getting out...
Mr. McDonald,
no problem, Mr. Morris. We wouldn't want you to give the town any relative information, would we?
Mr. McDonald,
you want me to guess?
Well, the whole point is that if the work was going to get started, and now you're telling us you haven't even went to the bond market yet?
Mr. McDonald, I'll tell you what. We are going to adjourn the joint meeting of the...
I should have asked you to do it.
We're going to adjourn the joint session of the school committee and the Board of Selectmen. And again, thank you to our team that's been present tonight for answering our questions. Thank you to the audience for taking the time to be here. Have a good night. Thank you. No, let's give the, if board has no objection, I'd just like to give a couple of minutes for folks to clear out so that we can resume communications.
It's up to the chairman.
Mr. Kyra.
Mr. Chairman, you have a memorandum from Michael Woods, the Water and Sewer Superintendent, regarding the Grove Avenue water main construction and a road closure. I really just wanted to provide information to the residents. We've already notified those folks that are going to be immediately affected. The town will be grinding and installing a 12-inch water main on Grove Avenue from Burnap Street to Winchell Road. The project is starting on Wednesday, June 13th, and is expected to conclude by the middle of September. During the construction project, Grove Avenue will be closed in both directions from Burnap Street to Winchell Road. Access to the town beach will be open at all times via Main Street. The closure will be effective from 8 a.m. until 4 p.m. Monday through Friday. Occasionally, the evening hours could be extended an hour or so to properly terminate the work for the night. Traffic will be allowed only to the residents that live in that portion of Grove Avenue. The roadway is narrow with many underground utilities, and for those reasons, we really need to close the road, as it will make for a far safer environment for both travelers and workers. We've already notified all of the area residents, including the Park Avenue neighborhood off of Grove Avenue, who will also have access to and from their properties at all times. We're requesting that folks heed all of the warning signs that will be placed during construction, as well as the detail officers. Unless there are questions, I'll continue. The board has a memorandum that was requested from Carol Hamilton, the Director of Planning and Conservation, just to give an update on the Target Development Project. You will recall that back in January of 2009, the Planning Board had opened a public hearing for site plan review on this development, which was proposed on a portion of the Griffiths property at 200 Ballardville. That's the former AGFA property, which most folks know it as. The development is to construct a Target retail store that is allowed in the Highway Industrial District of the town's zoning bylaw by special permit of the Board of Appeals. You will recall that we established this zoning district a few years back, hoping to attract a big box type activity in an area which would not create a problem for residents. And so we established an area right outside the highway. And at the same time, we eliminated the prospects of that big box operation happening in a current commercial site in the downtown or residential area of the town. As a result of that, Target came forward. However, because of the uncertain economy back in 2009, Target was unwilling to move forward at that time. However, the property owner, Griffiths Development, decided to continue the site plan review in the hope that Target's interest might rekindle. In fact, it did, and so a hearing was reopened. The original proposal was for the construction of a 138,500 square foot building with 501 parking sites. The construction now is very similar, 139,000 square foot building with 506 parking sites. Initially, the drainage that was proposed was not severable from 200 Ballardville Street, but met the requirements of both the sites in the area. Now it is in fact all on the one site. The 200 and 210 Ballardville can now be separated, is what I should say. The changes will allow for independent drainage systems. The traffic expectations remain the same. They require a MIPA review. At the June 5th Planning Board meeting, which was just last week, a public hearing for signs special permits opened. Target has requested certain signs, which the Planning Board is reviewing. We can tell you that they did want a very large freestanding sign at the entrance that would be 30 feet in height, where 15 feet is allowed, and that's something that the Planning Board is looking to keep at 15 feet. And they also wanted a 120-foot highway sign, which the town also is not in favor of. The public hearing for the site plan review was closed on June 5th. On July 10th, there will be a final review and a meeting. We believe that the construction will likely begin sometime in the spring of 2013. The board has a correspondence from Mary Freer of Verizon regarding Verizon Fios channel lineup changes. In this case, on or after July 18th, MNet channel 226 will not be available in the Verizon Fios TV Extreme HD channel lineups. You will be notified of that if you are a Verizon customer. The board is being asked to consider the request of Paul Regan, the Executive Director of the MBTA Advisory Board, to adopt a resolution relative to transportation funding. I have had discussions with Selectman McCoy, who is the board's representative to the MBTA Advisory Board, and we bring that forward to you. You have the letter from Mr. Regan, who essentially is writing to all of the member communities and asking each of the 175 members to consider a resolution that would call on the governor and the legislature to develop a comprehensive and long-term solution to what he refers to as a transportation crisis, frankly, as opposed to doing a year-by-year solution, to do something more long-range. They provided a draft resolution. What we did was sort of doctor it up, frankly. I'm not sure it was in the form that it should have been in, but I have provided a resolution that essentially would ask that there be additional investing in transportation infrastructure throughout the Commonwealth, and particularly in the town of Wilmington, and it would resolve that the Board of Selectmen call upon the legislature and the governor to immediately address the operating and capital maintenance issues that negatively affect the transportation infrastructure in the Commonwealth, and to act swiftly in devising a permanent and sustainable way to invest in the basic maintenance and operation of the transportation infrastructure. I bring that to the board's attention.
Questions, comments,
Just a
or
quick
motion?
comment, Mr. Chairman, if I may. As the manager indicated, we did have a conversation on that, and I really appreciate his input. Simply put, just basically what the manager said, but I'll touch upon. The governor and the state need to solve this financial problem long-term, not short-term. They need to make sure that the MBTA runs efficiently, like other agencies, privately and publicly. They really need to take a look at their expenses and its revenues first before seeking more dollars. That's the only comment I'd like to make, and I appreciate the manager's comments as well.
With that, do we have a motion?
So moved.
I'd second it, Mr. Chairman.
A motion to adopt the resolution and second it. Anything further? All in favor? It's unanimous?
Thank you.
Board is being asked to consider issuing a Sunday entertainment license to Fiesta Shows in conjunction with the 4th of July celebration. Whenever the carnival is in town on a Sunday, you need a separate license request for a Sunday entertainment license that is issued by the Board of Selectmen. We have a favorable recommendation from the fire department as well as the police department, who reminds us that they do a full background inquiry check on all of the individuals who are working at the carnival.
Do we have any questions, comments, or a motion?
Move to authorize the Sunday entertainment license to Fiesta Shows in conjunction with the 4th of July celebration.
Second.
Made and seconded, all in favor? It's unanimous.
Mr. Chairman, the Board is being asked to consider the request of Kristen Stokes for the residents of Jacob Street to have a neighborhood block party on Saturday, June 23rd, 2012, from 2 p.m. To 7 p.m. If the Board is so inclined, if they would approve it, subject to the conditions that are routinely established by the town.
Questions, comments, or a motion?
Make a motion that we grant the request as outlined by the town manager.
Second.
Made and seconded. Anything further? All in favor? It's unanimous.
That completes the regular business before the Board, Mr. Chairman.
Any public comment? Yes, Mr. Bodden.
And I'd like to remind the residents of Wilmington that this coming Thursday is Flag Day, and it's 6 o'clock to show up at Minuteman headquarters. And again, I'd like to invite each and every selectman, and I personally would appreciate it if a few of you would show up. Thank you.
Segues into our important dates, June 14 being flag retirement ceremony at the Minuteman headquarters, 6 p.m. Take it away, Mr. Manager.
Right, and then on June 15th, we remind folks that the Wilmington Relay for Life is being held this year at the Shawshing Tech, because we had anticipated construction had begun on the field. So remind folks that it begins at around 5:30 on that Friday, and will conclude early the next morning. It's a great event. The Council for the Arts 32nd Annual Art Exhibition will be held on June 16th and June 17th at the Arts Council, which is the Old Town Hall on Middlesex Avenue. The Board will next meet on June 25th. And just a reminder that 4th of July festivities will begin on June 29th and conclude on July 3rd with spectacular fireworks at the Town Common. On Saturday, June 30th, the Family Day and the Family Day fireworks will be held. If you're interested, there are online, www.funonthefourth.com to get any of the scheduling information. You should be calling 978-657-8081 if you want information about the festivities. That's the 4th of July committee, and they really have all of the information.
And with my segue, I jumped over new business. Any new business down here?
I'm good, thank you.
Nothing this evening, thanks.
I have nothing to report.
I'm good to go.
We closed on the purchase of Yentel Farm. Great job, good news.
Look at that.
Okay, very good.
Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved. Second.
All in favor? Unanimous?